Hello everybody and welcome to the inaugural episode of Curiosity Stop. My name is Charles. It is 30 degrees here. I am locked in a room equivalent of a glass coffin. I have no fans or AC allowed. The windows have to be closed for recording purposes. So if any of you are here to see a man slowly melt, you came to the right place. Keep watching. I'm joined here today by my co-hosts Cassie of Mythological and Folklore and Superstition fame. And I was going to introduce him as some young whippersnapper named Byron Lewis, and then he showed up with a more impressive beard than mine, and I can't really do that.
No, I'm afraid not. I'm too old now to be a young whippersnapper. I'm a sort of middle-aged whippersnapper, I guess.
The absolute horror and calamity.
Away.
Yeah, the horror and calamity that is Twink Death.
I know, it's terrible. Well, for some. I've managed to live through it.
Yeah, looking good, though.
Thank you.
Byron, welcome to the show. Cassie, I assume a lot of people watching are probably going to know you, as I said, from Mythological and a couple of other places. Byron, you've been on the Histocrat channel a couple of times doing other things. I want to give you a chance to reintroduce yourself for the sake of anyone who's not seen you before.
Sure. I guess I have to do this in a nice, self-effacing way. I won't say anything too grandiose. I'm the best YouTuber who's ever lived. And no, I'm not really. No, I'm a guy, a YouTuber. I mainly write as well. I've done a series on the Histocrat channel called History Mystery. I have my own YouTube channel where I make sort of video essays and the like. And I'm also occasionally on sort of local radio in the South Coast.
Oh, very good, very good. People might know you best now. In the past, you've done quite a lot of history-based content on your own Byron Lewis channel. And you've recently done a bit of a pivot into more conventional video essay territory, is what I would say.
Yeah, no, I've always had an interest in like media criticism and have written a fair bit for like sort of small sort of publications and stuff like that. And I kind of just wanted to do that on YouTube, really. And I got caught. I was kind of ill in sort of near the end of the year and ended up watching a TV show called Dexter and then ended up talking about it for like 3 hours and really pulled it apart and people seem to like it. So there's more of it. But I haven't abandoned history, evidently. History is still my first sort of... It's my passion. I enjoy it. It's fun. We all love a bit of history, which is probably why we're here.
Exactly.
There's no future in it, though.
They don't make history like they used to. Let's put it that way.
They need to make some more history, right? No,
I think we are actually making enough history right now.
Yeah, but not good history.
Oh, well. So, for anyone wondering why we're here, the premise of this show is a pretty simple one. Each episode, we're going to take turns to pick out a fun historical theme. And then based on that, we're each going to go off and find an interesting event or personality to present to the rest of the group. Then, once we've shared all of our respective stories, we're going to pick which one we think is the most interesting and enshrine it forever within our Cabinet of Curiosities.
Ooh, exciting.
Exciting stuff. Well, maybe we'll see what we can do in post. Got to use some of that there newfangled editing.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
or I'll just find a little space on this bookshelf.
Yes.
So this is reflexively where I want to go. Hey, Cassie, what's today's topic? Because we've been doing Mythological for so many years. But it was actually down to me to pick our inaugural topic. And I'm proud to announce that today's topic is Weird Pretender Monarchs. These are people who at some point or another impersonated a claim to a major European throne. The European part wasn't part of the restrictions, but it turned out we picked someone who was from Europe regardless. And this person either led or became the figurehead of a major revolt that caused a lot of trouble for the monarch of their day. So we've gone ahead and picked out 3 monarchs, and we're going to chat about them, and we're going to learn a little bit along the way as well. And the first of these is going to be presented to you by Byron, and I'd say this is probably the pretender out of the group that most people in England, at least, are going to heard of a little bit. If not, they've definitely heard of the monarch which he opposed, and that monarch was Henry VII.
Yes.
And this figure is Perkin Warbeck. So, Byron.
Yes, hello. Well, Perkin Warbeck, where to start? What a name for a start. Perkin Warbeck. I mean, they don't make names like that anymore. It's a classic. It's one of the best. It's a good name. It's a good name. Now, I remember the first time I ever heard the name Perkin Warbeck, and I'm sure this is the same story for many, many people sort of our age. Once upon a time, young me read the Bible, The Terrible Tudors, Horrible Histories. We all love this book, everyone does. And very briefly, there's a timeline right at the beginning that sort of goes through the period and sort of explains, what happens to the Tudors, that sort of thing. And on page 16, I've written it down in my notes, there is a very simple description of Perkin Warbeck. 1497, Perkin Warbeck tries to take the English throne. Warbeck hangs in 1499. And it's those two sentences that have inspired several thousand words of research. And, well, I've discovered a lot along the way and realised something fascinating, because Perkin Warbeck is someone that obviously is sort of vaguely famous, but he often gets confused for another pretender. Now, I had forgotten about this. Henry VII was, of course, on the throne for quite a while. There were 2 attempts to try and get rid of him by the Yorkists, who weren't very happy that he was king. One of them was Perkin Warbeck. That was the second attempt. And we'll talk more about them, of course, later on. But the first was someone else by the name of Lambert Simnel. Now, I have
another good name, yeah.
I know. They're rolling out all of these great names. No one else, I'm sorry, but that's more interesting than Henry Tudor or the guy he pretends to be.
This is kind of the problem with history. They kind of used up all the good names early on, so now we're here with Charles, Peter,
Byron.
History used a lot of Charleses as well. There were at least 2 of them.
Yeah, maybe even a third one. I haven't checked what's been going on recently.
No, I wouldn't. But the thing that I found interesting when I was doing sort of my initial research was that in very much the grandfather book to the Horrible History series, 1066 and all that, which, no, I don't own, I'm not in my hundreds, there's a brief reference to Perkin Warbeck and Lambert Simnel. And I'll just read quickly what I read earlier on today. 2 pretenders who now arose were Lambert Simnel and Perkin Warbeck, and they succeeded in confusing the issue absolutely by being so similar that some historians suggest they were really the same person. Now, as I said, I realised whilst researching this that the story that I knew was not Perkin Warbeck's story, it was Lambert Simnel's story, and we'll get to both of those in a minute, of course. I had completely pictured the wrong thing. So to set the record straight, both for myself and probably hundreds, thousands, billions of people, probably, let's talk about Perkin Warbeck. I was about to say Lambert Simnel then. But no, let's talk about it. Let's talk about Perkin Warbeck.
Yeah. I'm a little bit surprised that Henry VII actually had 2 separate pretenders, considering what had just gone down before he became king. You would have thought people might have wanted a bit of a rest from all that sort of thing.
Stability, and, part of it is the image, of course, that Henry Tudor wanted to portray and his kids, and we'll get to that in due time. But also, it is kind of crazy that he had 2 very serious attempts to try and sort of usurp the throne from him pretty much straight away. No rest for the wicked, I guess. But we'll get to that. Now, my first source is The Earlier Tudors, 1485 to 1558, by a man called J.D. Mackey, who was a professor of Scottish history at the University of Glasgow in the 50s. It is a very definitive sort of textbook for that period. When I looked on Publish or Perish, it is the most cited work from that time. I tried to make sure I was finding something good. And the reason I stuck with that source specifically, it does a really good explainer of Perkin Warbeck and goes into far more detail than I will today. Shall we say it has a very strong tone and a clear idea of what Mackey has a very clear idea of what he thinks of Warbeck, and it's pretty scathing and it's quite funny. And I will be quoting some of it later on as we go. And I think it's quite telling that one thing the source really made me appreciate as well is how little, when we learn about the Tudors at school, I'm talking primarily from a sort of British perspective of learning history, we don't really think about the sort of international element of the Tudor period. We only really think about England on its own, especially with Henry VII, because there's that baggage of the Civil War and the War of the Roses and that sort of thing. We don't really think about international affairs and how important that was and how important trade deals were in the sort of 1490s.
Like our relations with France, other parts of the United Kingdom. It's not kind of what we think of for a lot of later British history, where it's like we had effectively unified Britain and for a while Ireland underneath us. It's like, no, there's all sorts of tensions with these people still going on. And then obviously France.
Yeah, big time. And all of the things you mentioned there, so different parts of what would become the UK, sort of England, Scotland, Ireland, that all comes up. And for the purposes of this, they are separate kingdoms, separate countries, earldoms, etc. The other source that I pulled from was the Perkin Warbeck Conspiracy by Ian Arthurson, which I promise is a real book. It's not just like some sort of screed. It's not like the Da Vinci Code, I promise. It has his confession, or we'll get to it. It has the confession that Perkin Warbeck wrote in the original Middle English as well.
Wrote.
Quote. I know. We'll get to that. It has it in its original form, and I'm sure there's lots we can pull from that as well. I've also cited Tudor Rebellions by Fletcher and McCulloch. I did read through this section. This obviously covers a lot of different things going on during this period. But it was good for some context. And I have a research paper that I might bring up later on. Actually, no, I will bring up. And there's a paper that I'm going to bring up a bit later on as we go that talks about some of the sources for Perkin Warbeck's invasion. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start really at the beginning. Who was Henry VII? So, as a bit of background, in 1485, Henry VII became King of England after killing off Richard III and ending the Wars of the Roses, or that period of fighting within England. Though, of course, at the time, they didn't necessarily see it that way. It's not like everything is neatly defined in the way that we describe it now, of course. And as Tudor propaganda went, Richard III was this sort of uniquely evil, terrible tyrant who did terrible, terrible things and looked terrible and was terrible. I mean, there's some to it, but
that's kind of the popular view. I think to some extent that popular view is starting to be overturned a little bit since his body was recovered and all that. I think there's been more interest in him as a person rather than the later Shakespearean style figure that he became.
Oh, 100%. And I think there's classically been sort of two schools of thought with Richard III. He was that bad, or he was sort of uniquely evil. He was brilliant, or, definitely not deserving. And then, of course, there's that sort of grey in the middle interpretation, I think, is sort of, from what I've read anyway, has definitely sort of become more accepted over time in the academic world.
I mean, you can see a similar thing going on with Henry VII, where there was this perception, he was this really austere ruler who just accumulated a bunch of money and taxed everyone a lot, and it's
Yeah, there's a bit of push and pull, and we will get to that. There's definitely some push involved with Henry VII. But suffice it to say, Richard III had been booted, he'd been killed in battle, and Henry VII was now King of England. So Richard III at the time was, or as Tudor propaganda goes, uniquely evil, significantly worse than everyone else, of course. And the main reason that people go back to this idea that Richard III is terrible, tyrannical, evil is, and admittedly this isn't great, he likely had two young heirs to the throne killed so that he could maintain his control and there would not be any sort of power disputes or what's the word I'm looking for, or any sort of challenges.
To head off exactly what happened with Henry VII, which is pretenders to the throne.
Yeah, exactly. Pretenders to the throne. He was worried. He'd kind of come to power by usurping it, so he was worried, obviously, that someone would come and usurp him. And, as funny a word as it is, it's probably not something you want. So, obviously, he dealt with it the way that medieval kings did deal with it. That's not good, obviously, but, he was a king 600 years ago. It was a very...
It's one of those, I know people tend to make the whole, you can't judge people by modern standards historically, and it's kind of like, once you are actually the King of England, the chances of you dying are vastly increased, and you unfortunately are probably have to make some very unsavory decisions, as are many of the people in my section later on as well. And it's kind of like, these decisions are awful. I'm not sure you could have survived without making them.
No. And it's one of those things where I think, obviously, I'm not going to suggest, that doesn't make him good. There's no, I don't think you can really apply good or bad in to monarchs in this period anyway. It's just, we weren't there, we don't know. But anyway, Richard's and, This is the problem. Everyone's called Richard or Edward in this period. This is going to get confusing. So should we say
Mine's get worse?
it's only going to get worse? You're right.
Yeah,
So
I've got the same problem coming up. Don't worry. We're just bear with us, folks. We'll try and post a style guide somewhere online.
We'll do. Richard, not that Richard. So going back to the Tower story, of course. So Richard III had locked up two potential heirs to the throne in the Tower of London. Richard of Shrewsbury, who Perkin would later claim to be. So Richard of Shrewsbury, not to be confused with Richard III, and his younger brother, they were about sort of 13, 14, I think, were locked in the Tower in 1483. And it's widely believed that they were killed on the orders of someone, with the Tudors always blaming Richard III. I'm not I don't have a dog in this fight. There's some people that are very sort of adamant that he did do it, that he didn't do it. We're going to skirt this because it doesn't really matter for this story.
Yeah, it's one of those interesting stories that we're never going to get a satisfying answer to, unfortunately.
Oh, no. We'll never know. And I think there's lots of people with very strong opinions on it. It's kind of irrelevant to this story for now. But just know the main detail from this story, or from the Richard in the Tower, is that the bodies of the two heirs were never found or not discovered contemporarily. And this will be important later, because obviously people pretending to be them suddenly have a real leg up. There's no physical evidence that they've disappeared or that they have died. So the Tudors, if we ignore that kings and queens have been doing horrible things like this forever, including Henry Tudor's own relatives, then yes, Richard III was uniquely terrible and had to go. So Henry VII, therefore, saved everyone and became king. At least that's how Tudor propaganda painted it. Richard III was blamed for a lot of things by Tudor historians and writers, including, of course, being uniquely evil and tyrannical to the English, killing his own brother, that he was also physically deformed or grotesque in some way. And this was something that the Tudors really just wanted to harp on, that he was like this sort of, almost like sort of just evil creature, less a person, less a man, more this sort of evil entity, which I'm just going to be honest, is so deeply unfair.
Yeah.
But that's propaganda for you, isn't it?
Yeah, I think we're going to see today, monarchs were not subtle in their propaganda in this period at all.
No, not at all. And of course, some of it's worked. We're taught now that Henry magically smoothed over every crack that started during the Wars of the Roses. We're taught in a broad way, or from what people remember, that Richard III was this sort of evil, sort of bad man.
Bad guy, yeah.
He was a bad guy. And, there's some give and take. I'm not going to pretend he was brilliant or anything, but he wasn't uniquely terrible. And, of course, this propaganda started contemporarily as well. This was starting pretty much from the second that Henry had risen to the throne, and naturally this wound people up. Plenty of Yorkists, so people that supported the old Plantagenet way, or Plantagenet family, and, of course, Richard III, were none too pleased with Henry Tudor's rise to power. They wanted a body, preferably the alive one of the heirs that had gone missing. So, in 1491, they got their wish. Or at least someone telling them what they wanted to hear.
Yeah. So,
going back to the two sentences I mentioned before, let's start by unpicking that two-sentence description, because I think that's a nice way of sort of thinking about what happened. So, 1497, Warbeck tries to take the English throne. The honest truth is that 1497 misses out pretty much everything he did to this point. For the last 6 years prior, a man had essentially been doing a conspiracy tour of Europe, trying to get support from wherever he could find it with we'll get to how successful he was in a second, but he had definitely tried. There's a real effort to get something rolling here, and that on its own is fascinating. So
I think that might be a common theme with some of the other ones we're going to talk about today, is like these pretenders don't just come from nowhere. They're usually sometimes they are people who instigate these plots themselves, but sometimes they are backed up, like propped up by a disaffected group. But there's usually a long period before they actually appear in public, and we tend to never actually hear about those periods prior to they just suddenly appeared and revolted.
Yeah, and it's strange because it's suddenly you go from, we hear about the ending usually, and never really the journey. And I think that, especially with Perkin Warbeck, is the thing that really drew me in, was that this is someone who very clearly, by the end, definitely wanted this. But I'm going to argue, was so unbelievably ill-equipped to do anything, let alone become king. It's kind of a miracle he made it as far as he did.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about some of his near misses over time, but it's really he's got quite an incredible story, I think.
This is kind of the problem if you just raise up some random guy because it's opportunistic. You're really gambling that this guy will actually be competent when it comes to the crisis moments.
Oh, absolutely. And, well, you have to rely on them having some bottle. And, well, frankly, we'll get to that. We'll get to where Perkin Warbeck's bottle lied. Definitely not with him. So I'm going to take Perkin Warbeck at his word, or at least as he claimed to be when he first appeared. So his story was that he, Richard IV, or Richard of Shrewsbury, somehow left the Tower of London when no one was looking. He bandied about Europe until, as luck would have it, he ended up in Cork selling silk to local traders. We believe he was working for a man called Sir Edward Brampton, who was an ally of Edward IV, who was the dad of the... This is where it gets confusing.
Yeah, this is where it becomes a nightmare.
Everyone's called Richard, everyone's called Edward. So, Richard III had a brother called Edward IV, I think.
Yeah.
Yep, okay, good. I'm glad. I'm doubting myself here. I've got it written down, but you can just never know anymore. And Richard of Shrewsbury, who is the heir the heir that Perkin Warbeck is pretending to be, or shall we say, is actually, was... I've actually lost my train of thought here.
He was the son of Edward IV, to help you out.
Yeah, he was the son of Edward IV. That's it. So, Richard of Shrewsbury, son of Edward IV. Edward Brampton was a long-time ally and friend of Edward IV and was once upon a time the governor of Guernsey. He was kind of kicked out as Henry Tudor consolidated power and ended up in Cork in Ireland, which is where quite a few of the sort of Yorkist sympathisers ended up. Incidentally, not very many, but that's because there probably wasn't very many, but we'll get to that later. So, the adventure of Perkin Warbeck's life started really in Cork, in Ireland, where these people had sort of just ended up. So, Warbeck was brought to Cork to model silks for a man called John Taylor, who later would be paid by the French to agitate the English. So, talk about a dream job.
Yeah.
A quote from Alston that really stuck out to me was that Perkin was already practiced at presenting to the world whatever image he desired to show them. So he was very persuasive, and I think this is a really important point. People just seem to like this guy a lot more than believe him. He had a bit of an aura about him. And
yeah, that's a common thread with a lot of pretenders as well. Like, I'm getting the vibe so far, this is kind of like a male model just rocking up, and everyone being like, but he's so handsome, he must be telling the truth.
Oh, yeah, big time. I think people...
Look at how well he wears silk.
Yeah, no, he could model that silk like nobody else. It was it was a starved for fashion time,
Yeah.
So he did well, and people seem to take a shining for him. But the official story is that he was modeling silk one day, as you do, being like, look at me in my magic silk. And a group referred to in a source as they of the town, which I think is possibly one of my favourite descriptions of villagers ever. They of the town.
Yeah, I'm going to bring that back.
I think we're going to have to. I think it's the only way.
Byron, they of the town, yeah.
They of the town. Well, this is what the they of the town said to him, and if anyone came up to me, they are of the town, and if they said this, they came up to him and they said, blimey, you look just like Edward, the brother of Richard of Shrewsbury, and I'm sure we've seen him before, sort of around these parts. They were probably talking about Lambert Simnel, but that's a different story. They were like, wow, that's great, you look familiar, you look just like this pretender, this boy that's been missing, that may have been killed, thought to have been killed, but maybe not. Isn't that a funny coincidence? That's really weird. Why do you look like him? Now, Perkin Warbeck's response at the time initially was, what are you talking about? I don't know what you mean. I'm just me. I'm just Perkin. I've got a much cooler name than Richard. Why would I want to be him? And of course, over time, and shall we say after some prodding from the locals, he came to realise that actually he was secretly Richard of Shrewsbury this whole time. Now,
I was just pretending so no one killed me.
Yeah, exactly. He was
I just
so
had amnesia.
Yeah. He was so deep undercover, guys. He was just... There was a sort of... I don't know. He came to a sentence and realised, actually, no, I'm secretly a king, Now, the first person to really sort of push this was a man called John Atwater, who was an ardent Yorkist and at the time the mayor of Cork. So he really didn't like Henry, and he really liked the idea of having not Henry on the throne. Now, of course, one thing that will come up a lot as we talk about this is how many people really believed the story, the yarn that was spun from the Silk Merchant. It varies. I will get to it on a case-by-case basis. I don't think personally that John Atwater really believed it, and there's a lot of evidence to suggest, especially in Arthursson's work, that Atwater sort of prodded Perkin Warbeck a bit to come out and say that he was the pretender.
I think this is a common thread with pretenders, where the question of like how many people at the time believed and how many people thought this is just a useful tool to advance my cause. And you also then have like the flip side of people sometimes end up advancing the cause of pretenders purely because they make them into a vessel for their discontent with the reigning monarch, as we'll see. Right. And that can go really badly if it turns out then that they don't actually agree with you.
Oh, 100%. And there's that internal disagreement is I would say a big thread throughout sort of the Perkin Warbeck story. And shall we say, expecting a much bigger sort of turnout and people really wanting change than actually materialised. But we'll get there. So, Perkin Warbeck was introduced by Atwater to a lot of Yorkist fans, Yorkist sympathisers, I guess you could say. And I think Atwater was definitely expecting a much more warm reception to the one that he actually got. And Mackie doesn't really hold back. He's pretty critical of Warbeck's efforts and attempts to try and curry favour with the sort of locals and nobility of Cork, who, on paper, would really support a sort of pretender. And the reason for this, presumably, is because they'd been burned once before. So I mentioned a much more interesting, or another interesting name before, Lambert Simnel. It's probably worth talking a little bit about him. Lambert Simnel was the great pretender, and the one that I had initially assumed was Perkin Warbeck. He had a much easier time convincing people that he was Edward, the brother of Richard of Shrewsbury, who is...
Yeah, Edward V, who was deposed by Richard III.
Yes. And he had a much easier time because, well, first of all, he did it much closer to when Henry VII took power. I think it was 1487, so it had been sort of 2 years after Henry had come to the throne. He was now like, well, you know what? I'm secretly this guy that died. And people were much more happy to believe it. They also felt like militarily they could stand a chance against Henry Tudor as well. And there was a real opportunity to just overturn things and change things for the better. Now, Lambert Simnel did not become the next monarch of the Kingdom of England. He was very unceremoniously defeated. They tried to lead a rebellion in Dublin and failed miserably. He was probably only about 10 or 11, so to be fair, turning up to a big military battle. That age,
it's very much a case of people like propping him up for the battle rather than him leading anything. Yeah.
So the idea of an 11-year-old actually being like, no, I want these horses here. No, I want them here. Like, it's not going to work, is it? Like, no.
Imagine being that 11-year-old, though, the power that you must have felt in that time. Like, this is the greatest like game of playing with my soldier figures any 11-year-old has ever had.
Yeah, the rest just have to make do with Warhammer. It doesn't measure up.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, Space Marines, they're cool as well. Like, they got that added, like, it factor over the soldiers, but it's just not the same as having real people.
No, not at all. I mean, I just remember playing chess with my granddad when I was growing up and how easy it was for him to win. This is basically what happened to him.
Yes.
He was with real people, but, English nobility and cannon fodder. Now, with Lambert Simnel, of course, he didn't succeed. He failed miserably. But Henry VII took some pity on him because the boy was only 10 or 11. Yeah. Like, it seems a little bit unfair punishing him. And let's compare him to the guy that he's just replaced, who's quite famous for killing children, allegedly, per his own propaganda. It wouldn't be, I believe the term is, a good look. So he spared the life of Lambert Simnel, and Simnel went to work in the kitchens inside of Henry VII's court, which earned him the later sort of posthumous nickname of the Scullion King, which I think is quite fun. And to be honest, that's probably the best way to end up. And Simnel, by all accounts, was looked after. He later became a falconer as well, after working in the kitchens, and his son would go on to be one of the last canonised Catholic priests under Henry VIII. So, he was definitely, for someone who tried to get rid of Henry, very well treated.
Yeah, that's about as well as it could happen. I don't know if there's going to be any other pretenders we talk about today who have anywhere near that good an outcome.
Well, I would argue Perkin Warbeck could have got very close. He was definitely, shall we say, Henry VII, I think, as part of the sort of real politic of trying to sort of stop more rebellions, was kind of cognizant of the idea of how easy it is to look like you're a tyrant.
Yeah.
And
what I mean is just to actually get away alive is what I mean at the end of it, and not on a, not being hung or thrown in a gibbet somewhere.
Yeah, no, of course. And I think shall we say, if you were going to be a pretender, Henry VII was probably going to be the most lenient guy for punishment. And we'll get to what happened to Perkin Warbeck, of course. If he played his cards right, he could have been in the kitchens with Simnel. But he didn't, but we'll get to that. Now, the Simnel story, or the Lambert Simnel story, soured a lot of Yorkist tendencies, especially a lot of potential backers for Perkin Warbeck. So the Earl of Kildare, based in Ireland, big supporter of Lambert Simnel, big supporter of the raid on Dublin, not very happy that he lost, and therefore was very sort of just uninterested in Warbeck. Sympathetic, but uninterested, and definitely militarily and financially not that interested at all. There's a quote that sticks out from Mackie that I think is quite pertinent here. "The squib lit by Perkin's supporters fizzled out with the merest sputter." And
very good language.
I mean, it's of the 50s, isn't it? They're writing in a much more descriptive but not amazingly useful way, of course. Now, clearly, if Warbeck wanted a war to win, he needed help from the continent. So he went off on holiday with some new friends. That John Water guy followed him to begin with, John Taylor, and a few very close supporters who'd been won over. I do wonder if they were some of the town, but it's unclear. And, well, he had to do something to unsputter his squib, so that needed to be fixed. He needed backing on the continent. Now, this is kind of where I mentioned that things get a bit more international. I hadn't quite appreciated going into this just how much the balance of power in Europe directly affected Henry Tudor and directly affected his ability to govern, and the power and simultaneous powers and weaknesses that he had, and how that sort of interacted with his friends and foes on the European continent. Again, we kind of just get taught Henry VII as being a sort of fairly insular, not protectionist, but you don't dwell on international trade at this time, I think.
Exactly, they're trying to focus on like the interesting bits, and like I think in terms of him actually as a king, I think he invaded France once, didn't he?
Oh yeah,
like that. Yeah,
he did, and we'll get to that. He did. He tried, bless him. But
he keep up the appearances. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, it's just what you have to do as English king. You just have to do a bit of invasion. You do, rabble, sort of upset the Scottish a bit. Torment Ireland. Sort of the usual English monarch things that will wind me up anyway. But I digress. Lad's holiday, lads on tour. Perkin Warbeck, 1492. He's off to France, and after some initial good press, word had kind of spread from Cork to France that there was a pretender, a hot new pretender trying to get rid of Henry VII, someone maybe worth backing, and this reached the court of King Charles VII. Sorry, no, that didn't. That's not true. It reached the court of King Charles VIII.
Eighth, that's the right one. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, as soon as I said it, I was like, I've got my I can read Roman numerals. I'm just dumb.
Yeah, I was there going, Charles VII, is it Charles VII? Which was the mad one who thought he was made of glass? Oh, that's Charles VI. Oh, thank you, France, for having so many monarchs named Charles. But personally flattered, but it's not that helpful in terms of historiography.
I've got one Charles in my life. That's enough. That is enough.
Oh, thank you.
Exactly.
Might say too much.
Yeah.
But no, with King Charles VIII, he was keen on making life difficult for Henry. They had some disputes for sort of usual stuff between France and England. And of course, and this is something that I think a lot of English people don't always realise, the Kingdom of England included a bit of continental France at this time. Not a lot. They'd constantly been losing it more and more and more. There are a few sort of holdover bits and pieces left. There's probably a good map out there somewhere. I've not got it in front of me. Now, Charles was persuaded to take up Perkin for a little bit by Margaret of Burgundy, who was the sister of Richard III and the wife of the Duke of Burgundy in sort of modern-day France.
Yeah.
And she was a big deal in Charles's court at the time. and Perkin's fizzled squib had excited Margaret in some way, so she was willing to give this pretender a go. Now, I have to point out that her painting is ridiculous. The official painting, and I've been able to find a few times, is ridiculous. And I think that brings us to a nice little game. For this, have you got the thing? We'll probably cut this little bit out, but have you got Discord open in front of you?
I
can you
do.
see that?
Give me a second.
Okay, fantastic. So, I've prepared a little game. Something is fairly straightforward. I just have to ask you, which of these three portraits is the official portrait of Margaret of Burgundy? Is it A?
Wow.
Is it A, magnified of Burgundy? Option B, milk toast of Blangandy? And option C, Marjorie Taylor Greene?
For comedy purposes, I am going to go with... It's so hard to choose between A and C. Like, they're both great. I love them. I'm going to go with C. Yeah.
Okay. Cassie?
I'm going to go with C, I think.
Okay. I hate to say
so ridiculous.
It would be brilliant if it was true. I spent a lot of time photoshopping some of these, or two of these. The answer is A. That is real.
Wow.
I had to go into Photoshop and shrink her head down for B, which was really difficult.
Some impressive photoshopping.
Thank you. It's one of those things where I was looking at it and I was like, when I first saw it on Google Images, I was like, that can't possibly be that's an edit I've done for for when I used to do history mystery. But no, that
someone
is
who thought they were being funny for their history presentation in high school. Yeah.
It's sort of just if I
Almost.
There we go. I'm Margaret of Burgundy now. Poor woman. She's been through enough.
Yeah.
That was her official portrait. Poor woman. But anyway, she, clearly she... I'm trying to think how to lead into the next bit now. But of course, with a portrait like that, she'd been through enough, and she wanted to see her family back on the English throne, I think as penance for being portrayed in such a magnified manner. So, of course, she played on the fact that Charles VIII and King Henry had some beef, and the usual sort of stuff, as we said, but it was more... Charles VIII felt something was in the air, especially with Henry. He felt that Henry was about to invade France, and as a result was trying to stoke up as much just small little things to try and distract Henry from doing anything massive. And John Taylor, as I mentioned before, who originally hired Perkin Warbeck to supply silk, was hired by the French to just start problems, just cause trouble, sow the seeds of dissent, the usual stuff, as were insurrectionists or potential insurrectionists across England. Now, Henry was aware of the pretender at the time that he went to France, but frankly didn't really care about Perkin Warbeck. He didn't really see him as a problem. Later on, he'd go and describe him as a garçon qui s'y fait renommer Plantagenet, or a boy renamed Plantagenet, which I thought was just funny. Constantly referring to him as a boy rather than a man as well. Really didn't see him as a serious contender to the throne. And we'll get to it later, but I don't think anyone did.
Yeah. I think that's a sensible move, though, kind of refusing to put your opponent on the same level as you. Even if you then it all goes wrong, it still, in terms of his history, makes you look good in retrospect. Where you're like, I'm not even going to acknowledge this guy. He's not in my league.
No, he's just a boy. What does this boy know about being king?
And it's also this rascal. It's clearly someone else behind him. He's not a serious guy. Yeah.
No, exactly. He would have killed on the YouTube debate scene. Now. With going forward, Charles Henry had some disputes, had some skirmishes in 1492. All the while, Charles had actually taken up Warbeck and John Taylor in his course and looked after them and treated them really well. I think there was the idea that, if it all went pear-shaped, obviously they have a sort of hot new king lined up that they could install as a sort of puppet government. And eventually, and while this was the case sort of going into 1492 and for most of the year, by the end of the year things had changed, and Charles and Henry were both kind of suing for peace. They'd kind of had enough of each other's sort of attempts to sort of start something. And I think Henry realised that, again, it's one of these things he could just it would just be easier if he just stamped it out and sort of cleared it up. So in 1492, December 1492, Henry and Charles would reach an agreement in the Treaty of Étaples, which essentially said, we're going to stop fighting each other, we're going to stop causing difficulties, we're going to stop intrigue as well, and we're largely going to stop spying on each other, but we're also not going to carry around pretenders and rebels.
Yeah,
so,
we're going to stop intriguing for realsies, of course, definitely.
Defo, and the French and the English
Absolutely.
got on forever after this.
Not spying.
Yeah, I haven't checked French and Anglo France relations in the last 600 years since. I'm sure it's gone great.
Yeah, it's been fine. It's fine. This was the end of it. Yeah, we're all friends after this.
Yeah.
But no, Warbeck was now a bit of a liability for Charles VIII. He had served his purpose of being a sort of essentially a prop that he could hold up to Henry VII and be like, look at me, I've got my magic, I've got my replacement for you if we fight and I win. You don't have a Perkin Warbeck at home. What are you going to do? So he'd served his use, and Charles wanted to get rid. And so Charles did get rid. It wasn't to say he was banished or imprisoned or anything like that. Charles was very keen to just let him go. And let him continue to cause trouble for Henry VII, just as long as he wasn't in his sort of jurisdiction. And as a result, Margaret of Burgundy decided, well, I'll put up, this distant relative of mine. I will make this happen, and let's do it. Let me look after him.
I was going to say, none of this agreement has actually solved any of her problems. So
no, not at all. She's still miffed that her brother was killed off and the English throne was replaced with, this Tudor guy. She's still mad. And she also, and I think this is an important point, she was also childless herself. She never had kids. Her and her husband, of course. And I think there was an element of she wanted to believe it. She wanted someone to sort of pass on the traditions, especially of the Yorkist court, too. And I think she was kind of, as were a lot of people in her court, very happy to have someone to continue that legacy.
It's also the real politic of kind of, my status as a close relative of the king versus effectively being in exile over in Burgundy. I will be vastly improved, and my standing will be far greater if this guy wins. Oh, definitely. And I think there was a sort of real push. And it is interesting how little her husband plays a role in this. I think he just... he's not mentioned in any of the sources, but presumably he was sort of on board with sort of helping the pretending as well. Yeah.
It's fascinating. But anyway, she really took to Warbeck, and after sort of grilling him for herself in some way, the details have always been fairly light of how the grilling happened, or if the grilling actually happened at all. And a few Victorian sources I sort of skimmed through kind of made it out that she was deliberately asking questions that she would know he knew the answer to. We won't know, we don't know. Whatever happened, Margaret of Burgundy went, yep, this is Richard IV, this is Richard of Shrewsbury. I've been convinced, the world must be convinced too. So he stayed in Burgundy for a while and was taught the ways of the court, taught how to do things the Yorkist way, and was looked after. And as a result of this, was generally sort of well respected on the continent now. Now, Charles never went, I hate Perkin Warbeck, want nothing to do with him. He just couldn't have him in the court now. But their neighbours to the east hadn't made any sort of agreement yet, and their neighbours up north in the Netherlands had no agreement at all with Henry VII at this time. So within that world, within the Holy Roman Empire, he was seen as someone who they could do business with and someone they could get on really well with. And so he became a bit of a rock star, carrying an entourage of 20 archers, and palled around with the nobility of the time, including the king or leader of the leader of the Holy Roman Empire, Maximilian I. Now that's a great... Why can't we have a Maximilian?
Yeah, Maximilian I von Habsburg. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All of those are great names. Like, why are we lumped with the boring ones, Charles?
Yeah. I mean, your name is literally Byron. You don't get to complain. I'm sorry.
No, but because it's the English kings. There could have been a King Byron. No, that shouldn't be. Yeah. I digress. Anyway, my point is that Maximilian I really took a shining, seemingly, to Perkin Warbeck and Warbeck's story. On a personal level, they seem to really get on. After a funeral in the Holy Roman Empire, they even rode back all the way to Antwerp together. They had a bit of a bromance, I think, at the time, and got on. There was even there was even a rumor floating around the Milanese presses at the time in Milan that he was going to marry Maximilian's daughter and marry into the royal family properly. Now, of course, this didn't happen, but this was something floating around. This was an idea. There was this feeling that this Perkin Warbeck was the real deal, that Richard IV, that he was to be recognised as the future King of England, and Maximilian even recognised him officially at events as Richard IV, as sort of solidifying this recognition. Now, a big part of their friendship and romance was probably that, as part of an agreement somewhere, Perkin Warbeck said to Maximilian, yeah, if I die and I don't have any kids, you're the King of England, title of the Crown of England, Crown of Ireland, Crown of France, they're all now yours. So, that's one way to win people over, just promise them
you can see why this relationship was so attractive to the future Holy Roman Emperor. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you can. And, I'm just going to be honest. All it would take would be just Maximilian just would need to send a few assassins over, and suddenly he would now control the entirety of Western Europe. So, Perkin Warbeck, I've got in my notes, tactical genius. Yeah,
it's a good move.
Yeah, it's a smart move. Now, to be fair, I think this speaks to a broader Perkin Warbeck truth that he was largely seen as a bit of a nice guy. He's described by Mackie as being a dreamer. With his head in the clouds. And I think, as we've sort of alluded to already, kind of slightly put up to it and maybe taken advantage of it a little bit, because all of the people who were friendly to him, or sort of, happy to see him succeed, they all had something to gain from it. So Maximilian I, obviously, would get, lots and lots on Warbeck's death, and probably shortly thereafter he ascends to the throne. Margaret used Perkin Warbeck to write off a load of debts as well, and claim around, I've got in my notes, 800,000 crowns worth of debt.
Wow. That's as much as half of Western Europe probably costs these days.
Yeah. Like a lot of money. And the Irish nobles who did offer to help Perkin Warbeck at the time had good repayment plans lined up as well. And they wanted land, they wanted titles, they wanted everything. And the two Johns, so John Taylor, the silk merchant, and John Atwater, the mayor of Cork, really, really wanted something out of it as well. And obviously they wanted titles, recognition, everything. And later on, as he moved north of England, the same thing would happen again. There's a real cycle of people bringing up Perkin Warbeck to sort of agitate Henry, to get something out of it on either side if Perkin was successful, or inevitably when they sue for peace with Henry Tudor. There's a real sort of, there's a deep cynicism to supporting Perkin Warbeck, I think.
Yeah. I think that's a relatively common thread, though, with different pretenders. There's very little point in backing these guys just for the sake of, I just believe in his claims so much in these days. Everyone wanted to get something out of these guys. There's very few people who are going to be true believers like that.
Oh, yeah. And initially I thought maybe Margaret of Burgundy was, but I will say, and, I may have painted it now as being so, but the debt thing really did kind of change my mind a little bit. That just made me think, 800,000 crowns, huh? If it was 80 crowns, or 100 crowns, maybe, but that's a lot of money. And the money people were giving him was enough for one guy and his small little band to live off, but it wasn't substantial. It wasn't they're promising thousands or anything.
It sounds very much kind of how Charles VIII of France was using him as a diplomatic tool, where it's we're going to keep you around just to annoy Henry and make him give us some concessions to get rid of you. It's very much that I'm going to give you $10 to fuck off kind of attitude that Henry's going to have for these.
Oh, and fuck off he did. Constantly. He would just, there was a sort of element of just, well, look, you're here, we've got Perkin Warbeck here. If you annoy us, we've got a guy lined up. But then, if we settle for peace, then he can move on his merry way. Yeah. And I do feel, it's one of those things where this managed to continue on for about 5 years. He'd just rock up somewhere, be used as a bit of a pawn, and then move on to somewhere else. And it just kept going. It wasn't without, and of course, we sort of mentioned that there's sort of a cynicism, people not really believing it. There were a few signs to people that were related to Richard of Shrewsbury, but it was all sort of a bit made up. He sent a letter to one of his cousins, claimed cousins at one point, that that failed to spell their names correctly. So people were suspicious, And these were people on the Yorkist side.
That's some shoddy work, yeah.
Like, he didn't really try, and also maybe spoke of the fact that English was maybe not his first language, which we will get to. There were a lot of peculiarities with his story, and things that didn't add up. And like you say, there probably were some true believers, definitely in his camp. But a lot of it was sort of cynicism or just, trying to settle a score or get back into power.
Would English by this point have been the dominant language of the royal family in day-to-day communications?
That's a good question. I can't say for definite. It would have been a mixture of, obviously you would have had Middle English, which would have been spoken by most people to some degree. The legal class, the sort of noble class would have still learned French to some degree. And of course, a lot of Henry Tudor's quotes from this time are still in French or Latin. It would have been a mixture. Probably the court would have spoken more French than English at that time, but it was still in that sort of transitionary period.
Yeah, that makes sense then. So it's not a case of like, oh, he's bad at English because his actual first language is aristocratic French or something like that. Which would have made sense. It's more dubious.
Yeah, day to day, I think there would have been an expectation to speak English fluently, and definitely by the end of the Tudor period, that's all that people really spoke conventionally. But anyway, going forward, Henry, like I said, knew of Perkin Warbeck, wasn't that sort of interested in giving him any real sort of dignified sort of answer. What he did do, though, and I thought this was quite interesting, was he used him as a sort of scapegoat for insurrectionists and Yorkists who would start something. Because every so often there was a claim of, an attempt at a rebellion or an uprising, and well, that has something to do with the Perkin Warbeck conspiracy. They're in on it. They want to do something. Now, admittedly, some of those people were in cahoots with Perkin Warbeck, or would have gone along with a Warbeck sort of attempt at seizing the throne. A lot of them weren't. They were just people who were disillusioned or unhappy Yorkists trying to start something, and Perkin Warbeck was a great scapegoat. And quite a few people were arrested, sent to show trials in 1494 and 1495, and then summarily executed for their involvement in this Warbeck conspiracy, including some people who probably never met Warbeck or were, at best, sort of tangentially aware that he existed. Probably people who took him as seriously as Henry Tudor did. But there you go. That's standing in the way of power. Now, admittedly, Henry did see him as a little bit of a nuisance, and he was getting in the way of things. Yorkist support at this time interrupted the ability to start a trade deal with the Dutch, which was described in a source I found from the Victorian period as, quote, Henry in resentment banished the Flemings and cut off all intercourse with the Dutch. So that's pretty dicey and pretty serious. Now, Henry was worried about opportunism. He was worried that the Yorkists could just get rid of him. But it was more that local unrest would sort of bubble up, and then maybe Perkin Warbeck could sail in and be like, I'm the uniting figure that could bring us all together. Yeah,
we're going to project all our grievances onto you now. It doesn't matter who you actually are. You're just a useful, focus nexus point.
Exactly. And he got very close. But again, my favourite catchphrase of the day, we'll get there, I promise. So Perkin Warbeck attempted an invasion in 1495 in a place called Deal in Kent. And, well, to tell you how well it went, the section of Mackey's book that talks about this is underlined with the heading, Perkin's Failure at Deal. So he was unsuccessful. Deal is a small seaside town today. It's kind of like Margate. It's slightly more bougie than Margate, but it's kind of the same thing. Now, Maximilian and friends had got tired of him on the continent, wanted him to go back to England and really give this whole thing a go. And again, as a bargaining chip, trade embargoes were getting in the way. They wanted something to give. And if they got rid of Warbeck and if they got him to invade, maybe he'd topple Henry if he got lucky. Maybe he'd just distract him. Maybe it would cause Henry to sue for peace. Anyway, how did it go for our young Richard of Shrewsbury? Well, it was an unequivocal, embarrassing mess. Perkin came with 14 ships and 300 men, enough to really take on the English, and he didn't even bother to land in Deal. He just circled around from the sea as some of the other ships went in for him, and the other ships failed to really do anything, and the locals just beat the shit out of them. something as many as 80 of the soldiers were arrested on the spot by the sheriff of Kent and taken off from Deal all the way to London, where they were, of course, dealt with, and the rest just fled. And Perkin saw this from a distance and just went, "Sod this! I'm going off to Ireland."
This is my benchmark for failed insurrections for most people is the second attempt by Napoleon III to take control of France. That's and I'm amazed to find someone who did a worse job than him. Because Napoleon III, for context, folks, showed up. He showed up with a group of men pretending to be French officers. They were all drunk. And then the second that someone guessed at who they might be, he yelled about being the emperor and shot a random guy in the mouth. And then he was he fled to the beach and tried to commit suicide when the French showed up and arrested him. And then he was in prison for a while. And this guy didn't even show up didn't even show up to shoot a guy in the mouth. That's rubbish.
He didn't. At least he declared himself as the emperor. He did something. This was actually before Perkin Warbeck had declared himself, crowned himself, or had announced himself as Richard IV. Some people had recognised him that way, but he didn't even recognise himself as that. At least Napoleon III knew he was the emperor, right? This is just pathetic. It gets worse. So this was not embarrassing enough for Perkin. He sailed on to Ireland, past Cork, and engaged in a siege in a place called Waterford, which was described in Mackey's book as in a chapter called Failures in Waterford and Elsewhere. So his failures were so substantial that he had a long litany of failures here that they're now just described as elsewhere. Everywhere he went, he screwed up from one place to the next. He tried to siege Waterford for, I think, about 2 weeks, failed miserably, lost more ships, lost loads of men, didn't bother to land again, went off, and once again was stopped by the locals. It wasn't even that Henry VII had to do anything. These are just ordinary men sort of going out and just clobbering his paid-for mercenaries. He stopped.
This sounds like, Henry. I just want to be the fly on the wall when Henry VII is informed what's happened. And he's just wait, what? What did he do? Oh, we'd have to do anything. Okay. Just laughing his head off.
Henry VII just probably was able to have a lie-in that day. He didn't have to think about it. It is kind of incredible how badly Perkin Warbeck was at seemingly every part of this. Couldn't land, couldn't get any support from the locals, and the locals weren't happy with Henry Tudor at the time. Just everything was a balls up from start to finish. Yeah,
if I was Henry VII, I might start sending him money just to see what he does with it, because it's great entertainment. If you're this is the guy who is going to overthrow me. I was the guy doing the militia campaign in Wales in the background. I know what it is to be. This ain't it. This is not going to work.
No. Henry Tudor, he actually, it is quite funny to think about what if Perkin Warbeck and Henry VII were sort of switched around Freaky Friday style. What if they lived each other's lives?
Yeah, Richard III had nothing to fear.
No. Richard III wouldn't even know who the Tudors were, quite frankly, if that was the case. But
Yorkshire would rule.
Yeah, it would have. The Yorkers probably would have won.
Yorkshire.
Sadly, that didn't happen. And Perkin Warbeck somehow managed to survive all of this, probably because he didn't get off the bloody boat. He managed to make his way to Scotland. Now, of course, Scotland, independent kingdom at the time of this story. Very important detail to mention. And the relationship between England and Scotland, as always, complicated and complex. And, I'm sure that's definitely fixed now, of course.
Scots lovers.
Yeah. Scottish mum, English dad. Anyway, Scotland was trying to ensure that Spain, England and France didn't get into a big fight. There was a chance that this could all kick off with Henry Tudor. And France and England had started to get on a bit better. Spain and England, not so much. And Spain, France and Scotland at this time had a quite long, what they called the Old Alliance, that sort of kept that part of the world largely friendly. And obviously, that's not perfect. This is a medieval alliance after all, but it kept the peace for a while.
Yeah, the way it kind of went in terms of the balance of power was Scotland tended to ally with France, and we tended to ally with Portugal to head off Spain, basically.
Yeah, and it's interesting to think about that at this time. there was an attempt on all sides to try and get things, make things friendly and I think really to make trade easier, as all these things go. But of course, there's always going to be some disagreements and some skirmishes, and James IV of Scotland had some real issues with Henry VII and really wanted to get something started, at least at this time. And, well, who better to get something started than the party starter himself, Perkin Warbeck, straight from his world tour and dismal UK entrance. He made his way to Scotland and was put up much in the same way that Charles VIII had put up Perkin Warbeck all those years ago, and actually went a step further. He introduced Perkin Warbeck as the Duke of York, not Richard IV at this time, with a state welcome, and turned to him and just went, "Here's one of my noble's daughters. You can marry her," in a true sort of 1490s welcome. Funnily enough, that someone's daughter was a Lady Catherine Gordon of Clan Gordon, and a vague relation to James IV, of course. But also, if you go up the tree and then down again, you realise that she's a distant relative of another famous Catherine Gordon, the mum of Lord Byron, George Gordon Byron.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah.
Funniest of connections, yeah.
Exactly. And, I just thought that was fun. Any Byron fact I'm going to drop in.
Yeah, as Lord Byron's illegitimate son, you have to, of course, get those in.
No, what do you mean? I am him.
Yeah.
Yeah. Believable.
Didn't die in Greece, yeah.
Yes. Well, I have just come back from Greece, so which, by the way, being
even
called
more
Byron
evidence for it. Yeah,
being called Byron in Greece, absolute blessing in disguise. Was quite something. But anyway, he did try to woo Catherine Gordon, and he wrote a love letter to her, which I think kind of ties in with the fact he was kind of a nice bloke and sort of a bit of a romantic and a dreamer and that sort of thing. I will read part of it because, out of context, as with everything in this period, it's very funny. "All look at your face so bright and serene that it gives splendour to the cloudy sky. All look at your eyes so brilliant as stars, which make all pain to be forgotten and turn despair into delight. All look at your neck, which outshines pearls, and all look at your fine forehead." Now, I don't know about you. I try not to bring up people's foreheads.
Yeah, maybe it's just his thing. Maybe he's just the forehead appreciator.
He's the forehead appreciater. I mean,
someone has to be.
I'm going to phone up the missus later and just be like, "Hi, you've got a mighty fine forehead." I think it'll work.
If someone said it to me, I'd slap him.
No, well, this is why I have a fringe. I don't want forehead compliments.
Yeah, I have to pull this hair down over. Yeah.
No.
We're not even going into what's going on here.
No. Well, look, he liked the thick forehead, and they got married. And James, as a sort of wedding present, gave them around £110 a month to live off, which at that time was a lot of money, but it was also Scottish money, so good luck trying to use it down south, especially when he takes over. So tensions, of course, between England and Scotland were there, and by 1496 had really started to heat up, and there was a fear that James IV was going to invade the north of England, with Perkin's help, of course. And, well, Perkin was, as we discussed, tactical genius, had so much success before, why not try it again? And they did. And it was a failure. Of course it was a failure. I mean, what else were you going to expect? Yeah. Perkin Warbeck suddenly becomes king? He sucked. He was really bad at this.
It would have been a great twist.
He was so bad at this that that James IV had to sue for peace. They just cataclysmically ballsed up everything. They just couldn't get the people, they couldn't get the support, and they were basically rebuffed straight away as they crossed the northern border of England. So by the end of 1496, the two had decided to sue for peace, brokered by Spain. England and Scotland decided to settle their differences in a treaty, and it was signed in 1497 as the Treaty of Ayton. So this left James IV with a very familiar problem. I've got this pretender. I don't want to turn him in because I still don't really like Henry Tudor, but I've decided to sue for peace. We're all going to get on and be friends. I'll just send him on his way. He can do what he wants, and maybe he can go back to Ireland. And he did. So James IV actually gave Perkin Warbeck a ship, some money to send him on his way, and Perkin Warbeck took his wife, his new wife, some of his devout followers, and put them on the ship. And the ship was called Cuckoo, which I think was rather fitting.
History's kind of on the nose sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah, anyway, it could have been the SS Delusional.
Someone could have someone should have a word with the writers about that one, quite frankly.
I mean, I see, I don't know. Part of me thinks it was deliberate. Part of me, we don't know, I guess. It'd be very funny if it was. But anyway, him on board for Cuckoo, they went back to Cork, the only place where he was actually really ever taken seriously, not accepted, not just tolerated. Back to Cork. Things are different now. Henry Tudor's a lot more well-liked now. It's been 6 years. People don't really want to keep doing this. They're kind of happy with the way things are. Perkin Warbeck sort of laughed out of Cork once again. But that didn't stop him, because he'd heard something through the grapevine that there was now a new unrest getting started in a place called Cornwall, which is in the southwest of England. Now, at this time, Cornish society was kind of separate from English society. They had their own rules and laws. And their big industry was mining. Now, as part of the war effort with Henry VII putting up the defence against the Scottish, he had taxed the Cornish to a ridiculous degree, didn't really take them seriously as a people, and as a result, all of the mines were closed. People were pissed off, and especially in rural Cornwall, rebellion started, an uprising started. It wasn't a successful uprising, but it was enough to get the ball rolling. Thousands of people were out in the streets, trying to fight back Henry's forces, and they had, for the time, a surprising amount of success. So Perkin saw this and was like, well, that sounds great. I could do one of these, and so decided, I'm going to rock up in Cornwall and get this revolution started. I can do this. I really can do this for once. I've had 3-4 failed attempts. This is my time.
I've shown no leadership capabilities whatsoever. I have made no effort to improve. Let's do this.
No, this was his chance, and he was going to do it. In a section of the book entitled Failure of Perkin in the West, he managed to get as far as Exeter before things really started to go south. His army, at the time, to start with, was gaining some momentum. He got 8,000 men supporting him in Cornwall when he landed. He'd put his wife up in a castle, St. Michael's Mount, in Cornwall, which I've been to. It's very nice. They looked after her. He was well accepted. He even, on Bodmin Moor, which is sort of in the southwest of Cornwall, so the southwest of the southwest, he crowned himself Richard IV. He was on the warpath. This is all going to go well. The problem is that everyone sort of east of Cornwall had been made aware that he was on his way. They'd already defeated the Cornish once. They were going to do it again. And this time they took it very seriously. So the Earl of Daubeney, who was one of Henry VII's biggest advisors, just got as many levies as he could all across the southwest, from the southwest of England to South Wales, from Portsmouth to Pontypridd. As many men as he can muster, just everyone just going west.
Just west. Stamp this out, like we're not giving him a chance.
No, just bloody everyone, and fast. So Perkin made his way to Taunton, which is in Somerset. It's nice, actually. I quite like Taunton. And as he made his way further, they eventually were going to cross paths. So Perkin had made his way to Taunton. The guys on Henry's side had made their way to Glastonbury, which is not that far away from Taunton. They were going to meet, and Perkin knew that they were going to meet. And this was it. This was the showdown. This was going to be the start of something brilliant, which is exactly why Perkin decided to leg it in the middle of the night. Literally the night before their big conflict, Perkin grabbed 60 of his guys and just ran to the east. Funnily enough, my way. He made it all the way to the south coast, and his desperate need, or his desperate goal, was to make it to the Southampton Water. Apparently, I personally was going to save him, I think. Now, this was before the M27 was built, so it was pretty slow getting to that part of the south. It took him a while. He managed to make it all the way to Bewley House, which is a big manor, and now a motor museum in the southwest, in part of the New Forest. And, well, he didn't make it to the water. He couldn't escape. He was surrounded by the Earl of Daubeney's forces. They all knew where he was, and he had to surrender. His attempt at trying to take England had failed once again.
Yeah.
But this time, this was it. This was his final stop. He couldn't really try again.
Fourth time was not the charm. No.
No, it really wasn't. He couldn't even... the problem is he did it too early. He couldn't even hide in the James Bond exhibition at Bewley. He was screwed. He couldn't do it.
He didn't even have like the guts to go out and just being like, oh, I've just made a colossal mistake and I have to go out in battle now.
No. And He couldn't make it to the water. He was too incompetent. I mean, it's quite incredible being on the south coast and failing to make it to water.
Yeah, I'm kind of glad he didn't get to the water because I feel like he probably couldn't even swim. How incompetent he's been so far.
Perkin Warbeck would have drowned in a puddle. He's just shit at this. Just really quite embarrassingly bad. But I digress. He was not Richard IV, of course, and when captured by Henry Tudor, all was revealed. Allegedly, that's what we think. Perkin Warbeck was asked to write a confession, which he definitely did, and definitely not under duress. And everything in it is obviously 100% accurate. But some of the details have been corroborated since by later historians, and we think that broadly the large sort of the Cliff's Notes, most of it was true. Maybe some details were fixed, and the way he was coerced or the way he worded it was changed. The details that we know that are probably true are as follows. So his real name was Piachan de Warbeck. He was born in rural Flanders in modern-day Belgium. He was Flemish, so English was not his first language, as I alluded to before. He was raised in a town called Tournai, but he moved with his mum to Antwerp, where he learned French and a bit more learned sort of Flemish to a greater degree and was educated. He wanted to travel the world. He, quote, desired to see countries I took license to. Countries being spelt at this time Cuntrees.
Interesting. Some American viewers offended by that one.
Yep. It was
the Australians that's how you spell it.
Yeah, that's how I'd spell it. Anyway, on his travels, he met a man called John Taylor, who took him on, and this is when he would learn English as a sort of salesman for silk, traveling all across the sort of Western world. And he would eventually take up refuge in Cork. Of course, he was recognized. We kind of remember how the story goes. He was seen, he was spotted, and then that was it. He was now suddenly the pretender. And once again, he, by all accounts, was an attractive man, convincing and generally well liked by people. And this confession actually warmed him to a lot of Henry's court. They kind of realized the way he'd written it, or the way he was told to write it, who knows, kind of made it sound like he was just the wrong guy in the wrong place. He was a guy who wanted to travel, wanted to know the world, probably really enjoyed.
I know this has been like an unending slander against the acts and events of his life, but he kind of got his wish to travel the world.
Yeah, he did. He had a lad's holiday that I could only dream of. He went to Germany, Italy, France. I don't think he went to Spain. Definitely didn't go to Portugal. Went to Scotland for a while. Got put
Ireland,
up. Yeah, he found backers and supporters. And, one could argue, and possibly the argument that I took away from this was it was kind of, bad as it sounds, it was a bit of a grift, right? It was like he made sort of gestures of battles and invasions and maybe bought his own hype a little bit too much by the end. Definitely to begin with, I think there was an element of opportunism. And I think if the people taking advantage of him were opportunistic, there's probably an element of, well, I'm in this position of being able to see things that most Flemish boys won't see in this world, so why not go along with it? And definitely food for thought there, I think. And at some point, he probably did believe it. To some degree, he believed or was made to believe this whole claim or fabrication, who knows. So Scotland and England, of course, settled their scores, and once sort of Warbeck was sort of out of the way, that was it for pretenders. And the recognition of Richard IV was very much undone. Warbeck and his wife Catherine were allowed to be part of Henry VII's court. They weren't even made to be in the kitchens. They were just accepted as the court on the proviso that he doesn't leave. He just stays there forever, which, to be honest, is a pretty good deal. After Warbeck passed away, Catherine remarried, but still held a bit of star power for being the pretender's wife. She died without any children, unfortunately. And Henry VII managed to survive without any real attempts to pretend the throne after this. Henry VIII had even less to worry about, and by the time things moved on, the Tudors had won, the Yorkists had calmed down or died out. Perkin was a mere footnote in history. He'd later become part of a propaganda play by a man called John Ford, who's best known for a play called 'Tis a Pity She's a Whore. And that's pretty much how people got to know who he was. He wasn't someone that was recognised in any great detail at the time. And indeed, a lot of future histories and accounts of him are very much coloured by the Ford adaptation. But what actually happened to Warbeck? Well, he tried his luck. That one thing I mentioned he shouldn't do, escape, he tried to do. I don't know why.
Oh, no.
A man committed to failure.
You were just given a Lambert Simnel, slap on the wrist, get off. Get out, what's the phrase I'm looking for here? Get out of jail free card, and you decide, no, I'm going to go for the whole board, actually.
Yeah, no, he decided this was my time. I don't know where he's going to end up. No one was going to take him in. He'd acknowledged that he'd lied. After all, he'd made his confession. So really have no idea what his plan was. Anyway, he got caught and was arrested, put in solitary confinement for a while, and then released back into the court. So he decided to escape again. I'm sorry, but that's just taking piss, isn't it? So
it is
Henry saw this and was like, right, I'm sorry, I can't keep doing this. And so to bring us to that second sentence that started the journey off about 20 years ago, Warbeck hanged in 1499. And that wraps up.
He decided, look, if you're not going to learn from this, I'm going to have to actually punish you this time, and then maybe you'll think back,
Yeah, and he didn't. So Warbeck hangs in 1499. And that brings us to the end, thankfully. Very long end of that story. I'm so sorry.
It's all right. It's all right. We do this in Mythological constantly, where it's like when we started out, we were like, oh, maybe we'll have an hour-long podcast and do it semi-regular, and then the first episode is like, we have to split this into 2 hours, it'll be 5 hours long. So don't worry, it happens. Cassie, any thoughts then on
constantly?
Yeah, Cassie, any thoughts on Perkin Warbeck?
Well, I guess after all the chapters of the String of Failures, you could say that he was successful in that just keeping the game going that long.
Yeah.
Getting to see so much of Europe. It's like, I'd call that a win.
Yeah, it reminds me of the Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines description of one of the character classes, which is you're a party clown for kids, and it's like somehow you've kept this gig going for 5 years without a single repeat customer.
I mean, did he fail upwards, do you think? He just managed to keep it going for so long.
From the sexiest silk merchant in the world to I am briefly touring the world at everyone else's expense. That's not bad.
Yeah, because I mean, he never, even if he was successful, let's say, and got all the things he claimed to have wanted, would he ever have paid back those? I mean, the best part of his life was this sort of European. He basically got a grand European tour for free, in exchange for claiming to be some guy.
Exactly. That's a model that we can all emulate. Yeah,
that is a hell of an adventure.
And on that note, folks, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to be casting ourselves, much like Perkin Warbeck, over to the opposite side of Europe, and we're going to be looking at a pretender who's coming to us from Greece. But for the moment, enjoy these ads. They're a lot more competent than Perkin Warbeck. Okay, so we are back from that glorious, glorious ad break. I am now 15% more melted, as people probably watching will be able to tell. And we're going over to sunny Greece, where it's probably even hotter there than it is here at the moment, to be fair. For Cassie to tell us about a pretender that I have not actually heard anything about. I was really surprised by this one. It's going to be really interesting to find out.
We're not actually spending that much time in Greece.
Okay.
You've been saying Greece all this time, and I've not had a chance to interrupt it.
Greece is the target. Let's put it that way. It's not where we're actually going to get there.
Turkey is the target.
It was. I mean, the Byzantine Empire at the time was widely considered the target, considered Greece, as what I would say.
Yeah. So this is one that apparently neither of you have heard of, and I found as a footnote. Basically, it's going to be a mercifully short one for those of you melting, like I am. You may have noticed this. To keep me alive.
I love the fan.
Thank you. It's an actual proper Japanese one.
Yeah, no, it's nice.
And it's keeping me alive right now. But yes, this guy is basically a footnote in history. I could only find one source about him that really told his proper story. Everyone else just mentions, he was there. So the main source I'm using is the book The Alexiad by Princess Anna Komnena of the Byzantine Empire. I've got a bit of background from The Greatest Norman Conquest by James Van Wyck Osborne, and from the Cambridge History of the Byzantine Empire. But mostly the story itself is from the Alexiad and from Princess Anna. So yes, the guy's name was allegedly Rektor. He was a monk who attempted to impersonate, or was coerced into impersonating, the Byzantine Emperor Alexios, whom the Alexiad was named for. The book about him by his daughter, Princess Anna, is notable in that it's the first known history text in Europe to be written by a woman, and also quite unusual for Byzantine histories of the time in that it focuses entirely on the reign of one emperor, her father, Alexios. It's written in Attic Greek, the language of classical Greece, rather than medieval Greek, as was the language of the empire at the time, since Anna was a scholar of classical philosophy and literature, and was heavily inspired by the Iliad, hence the title.
Was it like an attempt on her behalf to kind of harken back to that time deliberately by using that language?
Yes, yeah. She went against like her father and mother's wishes in learning more than just the Bible, and basically became a very dedicated student of Greek philosophy and Greek literature, and wanted to very much bring that back
Cool.
in her own literature. As well as writing this particular book and writing her own studies of philosophy, she basically set up her own salon in the court where she gathered philosophers from all over the empire and sponsored them and commissioned works from them as well. She is, more details on her, a story for another day, but I thought I should give a bit of background on her as the main source. It's also notable in that it's one of only two works on Byzantine history that covers the reign of Emperor Alexios. Almost all of the other works on the history of Byzantium end with his ascension or begin with his death. There's only one other work which covers his life, which is the last book of the Epitome Historiarum by John or Johannes Zonaras, which tells not only Byzantine history, but history from the creation up until the death of Emperor Alexios in 1118, which was later continued by his successor Nikitas Achaemenatus. The only other major contemporary historian, Anna's second husband, Nikephoros Byrenios the Younger.
Wow, that's a great name.
He doesn't. Oh yeah, there's a lot of Nicephoroses in this. Nikephoros is the Charles, Henry, and John of this story.
A better time.
Many of them coming up. It's going to get confusing. But Nikephoros Byrenios the Younger doesn't cover Alexios' reign in his book Material for a History. He also ended with Alexios dethroning Nikephoros III Botaneates in 1081. All of this does mean that verifying Anna's account of this particular imposter is not really possible. Unfortunately, this is the one account that we have.
Yeah, we have to just take her word for it. Yeah.
Yes. And this is the source that basically everybody will cite when mentioning Regtor as a footnote. It just cites the Alexiad, and that's it. Even biographies of the guy who discovered him, sponsored him, or came up with the idea of using him, Robert Giscard. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that French right. Even biographies of him don't give much details on Regtor. He is the smallest of footnotes.
At least he got a footnote, I guess.
Yeah, and we're giving him some time now. So, as for Alexios' reign, to go back into the background on what was going on in the Byzantine Empire at the time, not to assume correlation from causation, but a possible reason for the very limited coverage of his reign is that he was deeply unpopular. He reformed many of the power structures of the empire in order to concentrate power entirely within his own family, excluding several prominent nobility in the process. And he was also the first emperor in centuries to implement any major economic reforms. So to borrow a quote that I borrow quite often from Douglas Adams, this made a lot of people very angry and was widely regarded as a bad move.
Yeah, was he one of these guys who was unpopular because he actually tried to do stuff and fix things, and people were like, we like how it's been gone, actually?
Basically, yeah. I mean, whether it was trying to fix things or whether it was trying to make things better for him, that's a discussion for another day. The Alexiad does recount several of the plots and insurrections against him from within the empire, But today, it's all about an external threat that actually was not his fault, that threat being the Normans.
Wow,
So
the Normans in Eastern Europe. That's an interesting one. Yeah.
The Normans attempted a whole invasion of Byzantium.
Wow. I didn't even know that.
This little footnote guy was how they triggered an invasion of Byzantium. Like, yeah, and it lasted quite long as well. It was a really good effort on their part. The Normans were expanding their territory throughout the middle of the 11th century. So obviously they expanded northward into England in 1066, as we all know. And in the 1050s and 1060s, they were expanding southeast into Italy. So in 1058, the Pope had granted the Duchy of Apulia and Calabria in the south of Italy to a Norman lord by the name of Robert Guiscard. He had previously taken the Duchy of Lombardy by subterfuge from his father-in-law, William Mascabelles. Don't know that one, I'm afraid, the pronunciation.
You sound to be doing well to me. I haven't got a clue.
Mascabelles, let's try it. Sorry, Italy. Guiscard also then went on to conquer Sicily and to conquer a number of Byzantine territories in southern Italy. But his ambitions did not end there. He had his sights on a much bigger prize, Constantinople itself, and the throne of Byzantium. He intended to do this through his daughter, Helena. His daughter, from his marriage to the daughter of William Mascabelles, was the first stage of his plan. In 1074, he had her betrothed to the newborn prince, or junior emperor of the Byzantine Empire, Constantine Ducas, the son of then Emperor Michael VII Ducas. Michael VII's reign, however, would end soon after this, when young Constantine was only 4. Michael endured at least 3 rebellions and several years of economic problems, which culminated in his empire suffering 2 simultaneous revolts from 2 of his highest-ranked generals. 2 more Nicephoroses, in fact, revolting at the same time. So Nikephoros Byrenios the Elder, the father of Anna Komnena's second husband, led a failed rebellion in the Balkans, which was thwarted by the then general Alexios, the future emperor. The Nikephoros III Botaniates, supported by the Turks, led a rebellion in Anatolia, gained the support of General Alexios, and marched on Constantinople. Michael VII surrendered without resistance in March 1078, and was allowed to live. He retired to live as a monk in the monastery of Studios, an Orthodox monastery in Constantinople. So Nikephoros, now Emperor Nikephoros III, stripped the infant Constantine of his title, and so his marriage contract with Helena was dissolved. Constantine would coincidentally go on to be Anna Komnena's first husband. And it is here that our imposter makes an appearance. So sometime between 1078 and 1081, when Alexios ascended the throne, a man claiming to be the deposed Emperor Michael VII arrived in Italy. He was begging the aid of Robert Guiscard in reclaiming his lost throne. In truth, this man was a monk by the name of Raketor, though it's unknown which monastery he came from. Anna Komnena does also give another rumour of his origins, claiming that he was later recognised by some as the cupbearer of Emperor Michael Ducas, but she doesn't say where she heard this claim. Whoever he truly was, Guiscard heard his supposed tale of the injustices done against him, for which his only recourse was to seek out the aid of the family to which his son was betrothed. He attempted to prey on Guiscard's paternal instinct, telling him that Helena had now been left defenseless in a world of such shifting powers, cut off from her betrothed, as Constantine Ducas and his mother had been forced to join the house of Botaniates. These words, Anna tells us, stirred the anger of Guiscard and drove him to take up arms against the usurpers, leading to Robert's attack on Byzantium. I might end up pronouncing it as the English Robert. I apologise to France if I do this.
That's fine. I think it's France. No one cares.
the French might.
I know, I'm sorry, friends.
Anna says that such is the story which came to her ears, and that she does not find it surprising that obscure persons may impersonate others of noble birth and glorious reputation. But that's not the only version of the story which Anna tells. The alternative version is that Guiscard himself came up with this plan. Having had designs on Byzantium for quite some time, he was not about to let a small inconvenience like somebody else overthrowing his in-laws first stop him. But both his advisors and his wife all opposed him in starting an unjust war against fellow Christians. So what he needed was a replacement Michael Dukas to support his cause in regaining the throne. To find one, he sent his men to travel to Cotrone, one of the former Byzantine provinces in southern Italy, with instructions that if they met any monk willing to travel north to worship at the shrine of the great apostles, and if his appearance did not mark him as a man of poor origins, they were to befriend him and bring him to Guiscard at Salerno on the west coast of Italy.
This isn't even like you didn't even like home in on a guy you'd heard about. You just grabbed some rando.
Yeah, they just needed some guy who was willing to play the part. That's all.
We will be revisiting that in my section. Yeah.
Yeah, and the fact that they just needed some guy, probably going to bite them in the ass later.
Yeah.
Because, like, spoiler alert, this does not go well.
This is, as we said with the Perkin. Yeah, this is, as we said with the Perkin Warbeck thing. It's great. It's great at first until the guy actually like gets ideas of his own. And you didn't actually bother to check what he thought or who he was or what he was doing before you just went, yeah, this guy.
No. The guy doesn't even need ideas of his own. This is just Guiscard having a really bad plan. And Guiscard would get nicknames like the Sly, the Wily, the Fox. He would be like known for his military strategies and just had a really dumbass plan here.
Yeah. That's got to be embarrassing though. Your reputation is I'm the Fox. The Fox doesn't have bad plans, then you have a bad plan. It's like now it's an ironic nickname. Great.
I think that might be why official biographies on Guiscard don't really mention Rektor much, because it's probably kind of an embarrassing one here.
You guess one freebie, okay? We'll just ignore that one.
We've all made one tactical problem before.
This was just a practice scheme before all his good schemes. Okay?
Yeah.
So in searching for some rando, his men befriended a monk by the name of Rektor, whom here Anna describes as a criminal beyond compare. Guiscard's men sent Guiscard a letter which read, "Your kinsman, Michael, deposed from his throne, has arrived and asks for your assistance." So Guiscard presented this letter first to his wife, and with her agreement to his advisors, reframing his original plan for a war as a fight to get justice for his deposed kinsman, the rightful emperor. They all apparently took very little convincing, and don't seem to have questioned that a convenient excuse for war just happened to fall right into Guiscard's lap.
I mean, if they're all wanting that war to happen, then they don't have much motivation to.
Yeah, it's like, we really, really want a war, but also give us just anything here to justify it, because we don't want to take the blame.
Yeah.
Like, give us the most shaky excuse.
It was the monk. It was the monk. He tricked us all.
Exactly. I think the version where it was a monk showed up claiming to be the emperor was just the version that Guiscard told to basically cover his own ass.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So, having had his very flimsy excuse for war believed by all his advisors, Guiscard brought the supposed Emperor Michael to Salerno. Here, Guiscard told the full tragic tale of the Emperor Michael to his advisors, as Michael had apparently told him, how the pretender, Botaneates, had taken his throne by force, kidnapped his wife and son, confiscated all of his possessions, and penniless, destitute, and without his family, he had been forced into the life of a monk. And so now, his only option was to beg the aid of his future kinsman. No expense was spared to house and honour the so-called emperor, with Giscard setting up a throne and granting him a seat of honour at the table, the finest living quarters, and servants to attend to his every need. Giscard made the story public, giving speeches as to the terrible fate of his daughter, alone in Constantinople, without the protection of her betrothed family, and the injustice that barbarians had visited on Michael. For those whom he did not think would rally to his cause based on these injustices, he instead promised them vast riches from the Byzantine Empire as theirs to plunder if they supported him in restoring the so-called Michael to the throne. He gathered lords and their armies from as far off as Barcelona, even pledging one of his other daughters to the son of the Count of Barcelona to seal their alliance, and mustered these forces in Salerno. Giscard even apparently secured a promise from the Pope that his own forces would support Giscard against Constantinople, but in exchange for Giscard's word, he would give his own forces in defense of the Pope, who had angered the High King of Germany at the time. Neither side fulfilled this particular promise, however. And Anna actually goes on a whole long digression about that I'm not going to go into today. As he gathered his forces in Salerno, he sent an envoy, a man named Raoul, to Constantinople in order to make the complaint to Emperor Nikephoros about his treatment of Giscard's daughter and the junior Emperor Constantine as his pretext for war. He also sent a letter to the general of the Empire's western armies, the soon-to-be Emperor Alexios, to try and secure his aid, and awaited for reply as he gathered his forces.
It's always whenever you hear someone being like, oh yeah, this general, future emperor, and it's like, this is such a pattern with the Byzantines, where it's like, oh no, we gave one guy some power, and it's like, he's waiting in the wings.
There were more usurpers coming, and it gets a bit ridiculous. This whole situation is ridiculous before Giscard even set sail. Because when Raoul returned, he had no reply from the emperor, which infuriated Giscard. He also dropped what should have been a very huge bombshell and should have put an end to Giscard's plan before he had even launched a single ship. While in Constantinople, Raoul had in fact met the former Emperor Michael, visiting the monastery in which he was now living. He'd taken care to verify beyond all doubt that the man he had met was in fact the former emperor, so that he could confidently declare that Rektor was an impostor and his entire story was a fabrication. And as if this were not sufficient reason to stand down Giscard's armies, Raoul had also received news from Constantinople on his return journey that Emperor Nikephoros had just been deposed by General Alexios, whose support Giscard had just attempted to gain by letter. Having taken the throne, Alexios had restored Constantine Ducas to his position as junior emperor, and so nullifying the excuse that Giscard was returning his daughter and his son-in-law to their rightful positions. After all this, even under the pretext of vengeance for depriving Helena of her rightful place as the future empress, Giscard had no reason left to make war, since Nikephoros, who was the one who had wronged Giscard's daughter, had suffered punishment by being deposed. To make that situation even worse, for Giscard, having just lost all his stated reasons for sailing to war with Byzantium, he was also betrayed by Raoul's brother, Roger. Roger, who had learned of all these events, defected to Byzantium. He told Alexios the story of Rektor's arrival, just as Giscard had told it, and all the details of Giscard's preparations for war. Raoul, of course, also fled Salerno. So all of these accusations from Raoul naturally enraged both Giscard and Rektor. Rektor maintained character quite well here. He begged of Giscard, "I ask of you only one thing. If I get my hands on the crown and sit again on the throne, that Roger is handed to me. If I don't consign him to the most horrible death and crucify him in the middle of the city, then let me suffer such at the hands of God." Whether it had been his own scheme to impersonate Michael, or Guiscard's scheme, he had clearly committed himself to the role here.
This is something which happens with these pretenders. Like, even when they're propped up, it's sometimes a lot of them just realize, I'm just going to go along with this. Like, even if it's like, it could have really negative consequences. I've got one example coming up where someone seems to have actually believed it as well. Like, definitely, like, not even had to be talked into it. It's wild.
Yeah, this guy tried his best. He was really committed to the bit. Like, Anna Komnina's view was that Rektor knew that his fate was to be a puppet for Guiscard should the plan succeed, and so he basically intended to enjoy the wealth and status of the emperor, even if he had no real power. So he just committed to being that figurehead there. She did expect that Guiscard would have Rektor killed once the throne was secure in order to place his young son-in-law on the throne as quickly as he could. But either way, this was not to be, as we're going to see. So despite Raoul's insistence that he could not invade Byzantium to restore an impostor to the throne, and Roger's betrayal of the entire plan to Emperor Alexios, Guiscard still set sail. Rather than sailing straight for Turkey, he first attempted to secure the Balkans, landing in modern-day Albania and besieging the city of Dyrrhachion in June of 1081. The governor, or duke, George Palaiologos, sent letters to Emperor Alexios for aid as Guiscard's armies set up their encampment. And it was here that Guiscard's scheme failed at the first hurdle. So Palaiologos had his envoy speak with Guiscard from atop the city walls and demand that Guiscard explain himself. Guiscard informed the envoy that he intended to, quote, restore Michael, my kinsman, back to the throne from which he was deposed, to his correct office, to punish the outrages inflicted upon him, in a word, to avenge him. Palaiologos' reply was simple. If we see Michael and recognize him, we will, without hesitation, make obeisance before him and surrender the town. And so, dressing Rektor in robes befitting an emperor, and with a grand escort of knights and musicians, Guiscard had him paraded before the gates of Dyrrhachion. The response? Mockery and insults from every soldier on the walls of Dyrrhachion.
Nice.
I'd like to assume that he was also pelted with some form of rotten produce, but Anna Komnina doesn't mention that, but that's the image I'm getting.
In the Hollywood version of that scene in my mind, there is produce and it is plentiful.
Yeah, and there would be tomatoes, which would be a massive anachronism.
Did she ever write down any of the insults they said?
Sadly not. There's points in various parts of this book where she's like, and I can't describe this because I'm a lady. And it would be unladylike to describe this situation, and so I don't think she would actually put any specific insults.
Oh, it's
there's
like in...
There's one insult that she does specify later against the son of Guiscard that is going to be a bit funny. But
Oh, good.
This reminds me of that last episode of Mythological we did where it's like Pausanias in Greece being like, hey, there's this sick-ass werewolf ritual going on over there. I ain't going to tell you much about it.
Yeah.
What do you want to know about these
Too
things?
dignified.
Yeah, I want to know what they called Rektor, and I want to know the werewolf ritual.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no one from the common soldiers to the governor believed Rektor was Michael. Everybody insisted he was a complete stranger and a fraud. To make matters even worse for this plan, Palaiologos made use of the distraction to have a regiment make a sortie from a side gate and pick off a flank of Guiscard's army before making a retreat back to the city. So,
Couldn't have gone worse.
Yeah, that is a pretty spectacular failure as a military strategy, I'd say. And so, rather than walking into the first outpost of Byzantium and being welcomed as a liberator, Guiscard had to dig in for a long siege.
Yeah. Not everyone turns out is Napoleon I walking in front of an army and saying, shoot your emperor. It doesn't actually work that often, it turns out.
No, that's what he hoped for. But it was not to be. Despite Rektor failing to fool anyone in the flesh, the rumour that the Emperor Michael Dukas was attempting to reclaim the throne with the backing of Guiscard and the Normans was enough to continue to bring allies and mercenaries to Guiscard's cause. And so he managed to swell his ranks even as he besieged Dyrrhachion. I guess he just didn't show any of these allies and mercenaries the Emperor and let them figure out that he was fake. Just with the rumors enough. You just got to take our word on this one, guys. So at this point, Guiscard did have the Byzantine forces quite vastly outnumbered, and when Alexios received word, he attempted to secure new allies himself. He found these allies in the Republic of Venice, which in the 11th century had quite a large maritime empire stretching from the city itself, along the Dalmatian coast of Croatia, to the Western Greek Isles, the Peloponnese, and all the way to Cyprus in the east. So Alexios spent vast sums of money to secure the aid of the Venetian fleet, which was hurriedly outfitted and set sail for Dyrrhachion. When Guiscard received word that the Venetian fleet had anchored in a bay to the north, he had Rektor and his son Bohemond and a squadron of men sent out to meet them, proclaiming, as he had before the gates of Dyrrhachion, that the Emperor Michael Ducas was returned to claim his rightful throne. And the plan failing again, the Venetians simply mocked them. Not only did they mock Rektor, they also enraged Bohemond by making fun of his beard, which is the only insult that Anna actually tells, and was a bad enough insult that it spurred Bohemond to personally lead a very hurriedly organized assault on the Venetians.
I'm personally offended by this beard talk, I must say.
Yeah. I think the issue was that he didn't have one yet, or that it wasn't much of one.
I think
it was against his age.
It's the actual reason that you should be mocked with a beard.
Yeah, the fact that you can't grow one yet.
Yeah.
They expected a man with an impressive beard to be proclaiming the Emperor. So, they needed one of you two.
Well, I'd say Byron's more impressive than me, but I mean, not having a beard is going to be amazingly is going to be a running thread into my section. So we'll pick up on that later.
Cool. These beard insults that led to Bohemond very badly organizing an assault. This led to his entire assault turning against him quite quickly. His forces were routed by the Venetians. They pressed their attack to Guiscard's main force and pinned them between the sea and the walls of Dyrrhachion, and did quite substantial damage. But Guiscard did hold on. It's here that the fake emperor, Michael Ducas, seems to just disappear from the account. Guiscard put his mind to taking Dyrrhachion by military means for the time being, and after this initial defeat, he did successfully drive back the Venetians and could again turn his whole force to the walls of Dyrrhachion. By this time, Alexios himself was on the march, having crossed to Thessaloniki in Greece, and was hurrying to aid Palaiologos in defense of his city. When Alexios arrived, Guiscard made one last-ditch attempt to use the name of the fake Michael Ducas, despite being well aware that Alexios knew that Rektor was an imposter, because he was the one literally keeping the real Michael Ducas in a monastery.
Let's use it against the guy who knows it's imposter, and let's face it, the guy we're going to be using, we already know he's rubbish. Like, he's failed twice already. Why? Third time is not the charm. This is like the least third time the charm that has ever existed at this point.
Yeah, he had the good sense to not send the real Rektor to this. He sent an envoy with a letter. The letter read, "I have not come to fight, your majesty. That was not my intention at all, but rather to avenge the wrong done to my father-in-law. If you wish to make peace with me, I too welcome it, provided that you are ready to fulfill the conditions stated by my ambassadors to you." So Anna Komnena describes his terms here as impossible and harmful to the empire. She doesn't state what specifically the terms were, and states that the request was simply to give the appearance of desiring peace, so that he could claim that the emperor was the one responsible for the war. Rather than using his imposter to take the throne, he was now simply using Rektor to control the narrative. At this point, there's not even any concrete evidence whether Rektor was still alive. Perhaps he'd left, not wishing to suffer humiliation after humiliation each time he claims he's the emperor. Not willing to face the consequences of impersonating an emperor should he be captured.
Yeah, this guy would never last on the stand-up scene after those first two performances.
Nah, he bombed spectacularly and maybe had the good sense to get out. Maybe Guiscard had the good sense to banish him or even kill him for what he saw as his failures. Perhaps Guiscard saw that the plan was never going to work and so simply released Rektor from his service. We will, unfortunately, never know.
Right.
As for Guiscard, as expected, Alexios did not acquiesce to his demands. However, Alexios was outmatched. His relief force was put to flight by Guiscard. The Venetians briefly held the city for the remainder of the year after Guiscard had succeeded in killing George Palaiologos and the rest of the city's leadership. Guiscard's war went on until 1085, taking a significant amount of territory in Albania and Greece, and only ended when Guiscard died of a fever at the age of 70 in June that year, which triggered a succession crisis since he did have 12 children, and collapsed his armies, which had been held together based entirely on promises of power, wealth, and glory and the name of a fake emperor.
I'm getting kind of the vibe that this guy should, he should probably be paying attention to home, not off doing this. If he has 12 heirs who are all scheming and ready to take over, this guy, and he's nearly 70.
Yeah.
Yeah, and credits him for being nearly 70 and campaigning himself.
Impressive, yeah.
Throughout half the Mediterranean and the Balkans.
Wild.
But yeah, his failed plan to use a fake emperor is basically just a footnote, like I say, in his military career, which he was otherwise known as quite a formidable commander and strategist. And even though the imposter failed to convince anyone in the Byzantine Empire, the claim that he was the true Michael Dukas was still enough to have this quite huge impact on history simply by convincing Guiscard's allies that they had a just reason for war and basically triggering the entire Norman invasion of Byzantium of 1081.
Oh, wow. Wow. That did not go at all where I expect. I did not expect the Normans to come into this in the slightest. No. That's a fun one.
That was a ride, I think.
Yeah, that was a fun little one. I'm really glad that you picked one that I knew nothing about, because it's just interesting to hear about pretenders in that part of the world. Because I know that Byzantine politics is infamous, the word Byzantine, for example. Their politics were infamous, and their emperor turnover at certain points was incredible. So it's nice to get a little bit more information on some of the imposters that were having a go at the time.
Yeah, I'm quite glad I found that little footnote.
Yeah. But you know what's the opposite of an imposter?
The products and services that we're about to tell you about?
I certainly hope so. If only for liability purposes. Enjoy. And we are back from those definitely not imposter products. If you are suffering from an imposter product misrepresenting your brand, hope it was Perkin Warbeck, because he'll solve himself for you. So this brings us to the third and last of our tales today. I think I'm being relatively fair in saying that the two pretenders that we've examined so far today, they're relatively straightforward stories as pretenders go. They obviously have their wild elements that we've talked about, but the idea of people, masquerading around Europe as this figure and eventually gathering enough support to have a go at the actual throne, it is a relatively well-worn path as pretenders go. Yeah. That is not the story of my section, or at least not the story of all of my section, because the figure that I have chosen takes us, we've been through Western Europe, we've been down to the Eastern Mediterranean, we're going up north, we're going to Russia, and this is the tale of False Dmitri. And also the tale of False Dmitri. And also the tale of False Dmitri.
I'm intrigued.
And more broadly, this is the story of a period in Russia known as the Time of Troubles, which is a period of, I'd say, civil war, pseudo-civil war in the early 17th century. So the tale of False Dmitri actually begins with another famous figure I expect both of you have heard of from Russian history. This is Ivan IV, who is known to history as Ivan the Terrible. So Ivan IV ruled Russia for 50 years between 1533 and 1584, first under the title of Grand Prince, then later as the first person to style himself as Tsar, which is of course derived from the whole Caesar imperial title. At the time, I think it's worth keeping in mind that title would have been considered like on par with a king, not with an emperor. That's going to be something that will come up later and is an important later part of Russian history as well. During his time on the throne, he consolidated the personal power of the monarchy into what some scholars have described as an early autocracy. He vastly increased the size of his country, and he brought new cultural innovations and links to Western countries. So at this time, Russia is not the nation that you would think of looking on the map. Russia is, I would say, the Western third of modern Russia, maybe the Western 40%. It doesn't control large sections of Siberia going over towards the Russian Far East, and it doesn't control things like Kazakhstan and those areas that the Russian Empire would later come to reign over. He was also famously known to have had a great temper, and alongside this to have had occasional paranoid episodes. Whilst there are no primary sources for this, he is widely thought to have either murdered or accidentally killed his son and heir, Tsarevich, this is a word I always struggle, Tsarevich Ivan Ivanovich, during the course of an argument, apparently by striking him in the head with his staff. The conventional rumour is that this argument was triggered by Ivan beating his son's pregnant wife, Yelena, here we go, Sheremeteva, after he was enraged by what he perceived as her immodest clothing. So this kind of says a lot about how women were perceived in Russia at the time. Like my pregnant daughter-in-law who has the potential heir to my dynasty, happy to beat her.
No,
no, not particularly great.
No.
So this eventually resulted in her miscarrying her child. That's what the rumor goes by anyway. I apologize, like the first half of this entire thing is just going to be one awful Russian thing after another happening, because as some people may not be aware, there are many episodes of Russian history where Russia just got completely stuck playing on nightmare mode. Like the War of the Roses in England might have been hard mode. This is another level on top of that we're going to be operating on here.
It's pretty brutal.
Yeah. Unfortunately, according to the historian Sergei Bogat, who writes in the Cambridge History of Russia, these rumors are largely unverified. About all we know is that Ivan did almost certainly kill his son in a brawl, and apparently regretted it afterwards. The exact motivation for, though, we don't know. It's at this point that I should probably actually say what my sources are for today. So my main sources for this episode are the works Volume 1 of A Cambridge History of Russia, which was edited by Maureen Perry, and involves a whole bunch of other authors as well that I'll shout out as I go. Now, the next is kind of like the main dissenting voice I've used. This is a work by a scholar called Chester S.L. Dunning, and he's kind of the odd man out a little bit amongst historians of this period. There's quite a few people that have their different prejudices and pet theories around this time, as all historians do, and he's the one in particular I would say is probably the nicest towards False Dmitri that we're going to encounter. I used his work, Russia's First Civil War, the Time of Troubles, and the Founding of the Romanov Dynasty. And then, on top of that, I also verified a few details using The Time of Troubles, Russia in Crisis by Ruslan G. Skrinnikov. And I didn't use as much of this as the other two volumes. This guy was much more favourable to one of False Dmitri's main opponents, as we'll get into. All of this means that when Ivan IV finally died in March of 1854, the throne was inherited by his second surviving son, Fyodor I. And Fyodor, not a bad guy as far as I can tell, looking at the history, but probably was very infirm, very pious, completely ineffective as a ruler. Turned out to be completely ineffective of exercising meaningful power, and this meant that state power quickly became contested between a whole bunch of different groups. These included this is another great word. These included the Okolnishi court officials, who were kind of like I haven't really gone into this in my script, but Ivan the Terrible, one of the ways he augmented his power is he had this utterly horrifying like court bureaucracy that he basically used to persecute his nobles later in his reign. And they kind of became a power in and of themselves outside of the nobility. Other factions vying for power were the nobility within the State Duma, who from here on out I'm generally going to refer to as the boyars. The eventual winner, however, was Fyodor's brother-in-law, who was the boyar Boris Godunov, and his allies, the Romanov family. So some people may be familiar with the Romanov family from later Russian history. By the summer of 1584, Boris had effectively become regent of Russia, and after slowly suppressing his main rivals, he remained the driving force in Russian politics for the rest of Fyodor's reign. Unfortunately for Boris, he came to power at a horrible time in Russian history. There's no sugarcoating this one. Russia had a myriad of problems, like towards the end of the 16th century and the beginning of the 17th century. Whilst I read out that summary of Ivan IV's reign earlier, and it made him sound like he was probably quite a successful ruler, the later years of his rule had actually left Russia suffering many systemic problems, I should say. According to Chester Dunning, the expansionist policies and foreign wars he pursued had resulted in the country now possessing far more territory than it had the resources to actually administer and defend. Russia's participation in a bunch of foreign wars, particularly the Livonian War of 1558 to 1583, so that war, which literally went on for a quarter century, had resulted in great cost without gaining much in the way of territory or new wealth. Russia also had to contend with repeated foreign invasions, particularly raids from the Crimean Tatars to the south, who in 1571 had successfully bypassed Russia's fortifications and burned down Moscow. So, already not going well.
No.
Gets worse. Gets much worse. These various factors had meant that Russian society had become increasingly militarized, and these increased military expenditures made it really vulnerable if anything happened to destabilize its economy, which was quite agrarian. So this is the point where you are praying for some good harvests. That did not happen. It's Russia. Like, it's a coin flip. Are you going to get a good or a bad harvest? And unfortunately, from 1550 onwards, Europe was hit by the effects of what became known as the Little Ice Age, which, not a good time to be alive. This was a prolonged period of cooler temperatures and poor weather. This resulted in a number of famines throughout Russia during the next 200 years, including one that this is like real nightmare territory. One particularly awful famine that took place under Ivan IV's successors between 1601 and 1603. So the main comparison I can think of in like Western Europe here is the effects of the Black Death, killing a sizable chunk of the population. This famine is on that level. This famine killed a third of the population in southern Russia. It may have killed 2/3 in northern Russia. And you might think this causes all sorts of things to do with, like, some of the after effects of the Black Plague, for example, actually improved things for the peasants and working class people because suddenly their labor was in much higher demand. That didn't happen here.
Nope.
Because to complicate matters even further, this period also saw the intensification of serfdom throughout southern and western Russia. And this was a practice where peasants are tied to work on the land that they do not own, that belongs to a specific lord, and they are not free to seek their own employment elsewhere. For many decades, Marxist historians under the Soviet Union would focus on this element of the struggle. Like, they really frame this as a class struggle where the peasants failed to overthrow serfdom. Chester Dunning and most other historians from this period argue that this really is a massive oversimplification, and none of the people who are going to be major participants in this civil war going forwards really wanted this. They may have made some occasional concessions towards this idea to draw support, but it's not a major motivating factor. Instead, it's a more combination of all the different factors that I mentioned above. Ironically, about the closest to any of the people who are going to be major players in this going forwards, to anyone who was actually trying to get rid of serfdom, is probably False Dmitri, whose rise does have elements of a popular uprising. He probably still didn't want to get rid of serfdom. So it's safe to say that by the early 1600s, Russia was a country suffering from a myriad of political, social, and economic problems that were the ideal seeding ground for a civil war. To understand the origins of False Dmitri, then we have to turn to Ivan the Terrible's third surviving son, Tsarevich Dmitry Ivanovich. who was his only son with, depending on the source, either his 6th wife or his 8th wife.
But
That's
never
going-
the 7th.
No, like that's going through wives like very, very close to beating Henry VIII there. Either equalized or like beat him, as far as I can tell.
Henry VIII only had 6. He beat Henry VIII.
Well, it depends. Like only 3 of his marriages were ever actually recognized by the Orthodox Church. So it's one of these where it's like he's pulling a Canute the Great move here, where it's like I have my Christian wife and I have my other wives. Although he wouldn't have seen it that way. So according to A.P. Pavlov, writing in a chapter of the Cambridge History of Russia, the night of Ivan the Terrible's death, several members of Maria Nagaya's family, that's his 6th wife, were banished from the court. Soon after, the 3-year-old Dmitry Ivanovich and his mother were expelled to their estates at Olgich, where Dmitry would remain until he died in May of 1591 under some really murky circumstances. So the most popular repeated theory is that he was assassinated on the orders of Boris Godunov, who by this point is the regent of Russia. There are really good reasons why this could have been the case. This theory was one that was heavily promoted by Dmitry's Nogoi relatives on his mother's side, and they would go on to use it at the time as a pretext to murder a local official and to incite a riot. Despite this, an official inquiry headed by Prince Vasily Shuisky determined that the then 10-year-old Tsarevich had suffered an epileptic fit whilst playing with a knife and stabbed himself in the throat. That's definitely a thing which happens, of course.
Yeah. In Tsarist Russia, maybe.
Yeah, possibly. Like, oh no, he tripped and accidentally fell down the stairs and stabbed himself 17 times with his own knife.
It's a very believable story when the consequences of disbelieving it are for the same to happen to you.
Yeah. It's like, I don't know, it's one of those things where, like, this idea that Dmitry was murdered was very widely circulated and it became a very popular literary legend. In the Cambridge History of Russia, A.P. Pavlov argues that the contemporary sources of this are actually not very convincing, and the documents and sources we have are confused enough that we can't definitively say that Boris had Dmitry killed. They're also not clear enough to say that he didn't have him killed. So it's a Richard III situation. It's also uncertain whether he actually had all that much reason to have him killed. Like, as I say, Dmitry was the son of a wife of Ivan the Terrible who was not recognized as legitimate by the Orthodox Church. So, like, I can get people arguing that. I personally think that, like, any blood relative of Ivan the Terrible is going to be a danger if you are a member of the nobility who is this close to seizing power. In January 1598, Fyodor I dies without surviving issue. This effectively brings the Rurikid dynasty, which had ruled Russia for as long as there had been a Russia, to a close. They're done at this point, mostly. After a brief period of mourning, Boris Godunov appears to have outmaneuvered the other main contenders, who were the Romanovs. I'm sure that they'll never get near the throne again. And in February, he was elected Tsar by an assembly of the land, which would have been known as a Zemsky Sobor, which I think is actually a fantastic name. Whilst later accounts claim that he was elected by an assembly staffed by his sycophants, the records of the time show that he was broadly backed by the aristocracy, including some of these rivals. There's like documents where they all signed off on him, basically. Boris would reign into the early 1600s, during which time the continuing crises in Russia, combined with his heavy taxation and ineffective divvying, I'm just going to say, over how to manage serfdom, made him really unpopular with the nobility, and really unpopular with the common guy in the street as well. Despite this, it's one of those situations where not many people like this guy. There is no obvious rival to this guy at this moment. So he may have been unpopular, his power still seemed moderately secure. And meanwhile, the deceased Tsarevich Dmitry had apparently been completely forgotten about. Then in 1603, this all changed. That summer, a young man claiming to be Tsarevich Dmitry Ivanovich arrived at the estate of Prince Adam Vishnetsky in neighboring Poland, Lithuania. He told the prince that he had escaped from assassins sent by Boris Godunov, and that he was seeking to reclaim the throne of Russia. I'm going to struggle with this name. Thankfully, I only have to say it once more. Vishnevetsky believed him, and he was eventually taken to the court of King Sigismund III Vasa, who lent him a degree of support. And in terms of like some of the support that Perkin Warbeck was getting Byron, it's a similar situation where it's like, maybe I'll entertain this guy, maybe I can use him in some scheming a bit later on. But for a long time, it's like non-committal for a while. The actual identity of this man, who is known to history as False Dmitri, is still uncertain. In traditional historiography, he is claimed to have been a defrocked priest of noble origin, named either Grigory or Grishka Otropev. And according to Maureen Perry in the Cambridge History of Russia, this is still the general view of most historians, that he was the guy. Ruslan Skirinikov follows this line in his work and pretty consistently just outright describes False Dmitri as Otropev. Chester Dunning, however, has dissented majorly from this view, and he has argued that this perception is mostly a creation of propaganda by Dmitri's immediate successors, particularly by a guy that we mentioned before, who was the guy who did the official inquiry into the real Tsarevic's death, one Prince Vasily Shusky, which painted Dmitry as a sorcerer, a secret Catholic, and a tool of the wider Polish intervention in Russia. And I think those are all kind of arguable points that we'll go into. So Dunning instead argues that Dmitry was not Otropev, that he was actually a Russian, and that whilst Poland took advantage of his attempt to seize the throne, it was more likely initiated with the help of Russian nobility. Probably people who were disaffected by the rule of Tsar Boris. This in turn has been argued against by A.P. Pavlov, who claims that there is little convincing evidence of a plot amongst the boyars, and that Dmitry probably initially actually acted by himself. Most controversially, Dunning has also claimed that the False Dmitry might actually have been the real deal. So this may actually not have been a pretender at all. There are some suspicious things about how Dmitry's death came about, as I said. Also, I think notably his body was withheld from the Russian authorities for a while by his mother's relatives. So there is a brief window where someone could have been swapped out, possibly. But we don't know, honestly. Other sources from the time also claim that he was a low-born Cossack, based on them later being one of his major bases of support. For reference, the Cossacks were a semi-nomadic people from eastern Ukraine who were frequently conscripted into the Polish and Russian army to act as irregulars. Prior to Dmitry's invasion, they had suffered harsh treatment from Tsar Boris, and it's unsurprising they would align themselves with the pretender as a result. So, the summary I would give from all of that is just the sources agree that False Dmitry himself, he appears to have very well thought that he was False Dmitry. All his public acts indicate that he thought that he was Tsarevich Dmitry. So that's about the only unifying thing we can say about this guy at this point. So False Dmitry would languish at the Polish court until 1604, when the king finally seems to have given him the go-ahead. Most historians believe that during this time, Dmitry also secretly converted to Catholicism in order to secure his support. Chester Dunning argues that this may simply have been a cynical act by Dmitry to secure support, as he didn't really do anything to promote Catholicism in Russia once he gets back there. I think it very much is yeah, sure, I'll definitely do that. Dmitry was also likely betrothed to a Polish princess, Maria Nishek, who was the daughter of one of his major backers, and who also went on to be one of his future generals. And in the event of his success, he also promised to provide Sigismund with an army for war against the Ottomans. Despite all this, the king and nobility did not provide really anything in the way of overt support for the plot, financially or in terms of men. This is probably because the really powerful parliament in Poland, Lithuania, the Sejm, I really should have looked this one up in advance. It's spelled SEGM. They really opposed this venture. Instead, the king appears to have been content to stand by and just let this happen and leave the actual details of this to some private backers who provided the real funding and the real men. So by September of 1604, Dmitry's backers had put together an army of about 2,500 men, consisting of paid mercenaries, and around 1,400 of whom were Cossacks. By the time he managed to get to Russia, this had swelled to about 4,000 men. So, as you mentioned before, Byron, with Perkin Warbeck, this kind of sounds maybe relatively impressive on paper.
Yeah, it's got a bit of momentum going towards it.
Something's happening.
Yeah.
For comparison, like in terms of what a good, competent Tsar in a time of relative peace and stability in their country would be able to probably muster in Russia, he could probably muster over 100,000 men.
Ah.
So that in itself is nothing impressive. There's no guarantee that this is going to get anywhere at all.
No.
So this, however, would be swelled a little bit once they got over the borders. Like another more sizable force joined them. This had been gathered by Cossacks throughout southeastern Russia, who had skillfully exploited discontent after the famine, and just generally with Boris Godunov's increasingly harsh imposition of serfdom and like centralized rule in what had previously been quite an autonomous region within Russia. So, whilst this is all going on, Boris Godunov is not like blind to this happening. He is very aware that this is going on, and despite this, his response was shit. Like absolute garbage. When Dmitry arrived, he found no army in the field to oppose him. And like already this is clown shoes stuff. And then on top of that, Russia's western fortresses, the border fortresses which protected the capital, had not been like refortified.
Oh.
So he was
just waltzed in there.
Kind of. Yeah. Like, there were still sizable garrisons in some of these, but there was no effort made to reinforce this place.
No.
And to be fair to Dmitry, he made some smart moves. Like Dmitry is going to make both of these pretenders that you brought to the table here, like they are F tier to Dmitry's S tier at the moment. So what he immediately did was, rather than go straight to all these heavily defended fortresses, he trekked through the woods to a border fortress, Moravsk. It's Moravsk. Moravsk. Which promptly went over to his side and declared for the true Tsar. So already it's going well. Soon after, the city of Chernigov surrendered to him. Its garrison did resist for a while, but its populace rose up against them. And then, buoyed by these successes, Dmitry headed up the Desna River to the major Ukrainian city of Novgorod Siversky, reaching it in mid-November. So this is the first of many moments where it looks like everything is about to come undone for Dmitry. And this is a running theme with False Dmitri, which is it looks like things are going badly, and then the situation is miraculously transformed. It happens over and over again, and it doesn't just happen to him, as we're going to see. So there, despite trying to negotiate and then eventually storm the city, his efforts failed. The garrison held out, and his invasion kind of stalls. To make things even worse, his paid mercenaries threaten to return home, and quite a lot of them end up abandoning him. So, as I say, looks like things are dicey for a second. Then, by happenstance, he is saved. Out of nowhere, one of the major fortresses in Russia's western and southern defenses, Putivly, which is like 100 miles away at the moment, goes over to him. It brings all its military forces with it.
Oh, wow.
Just got insanely lucky, this guy. This is a problem for Tsar Boris, because this splits open like all of the southwestern, like all the defenses of the southwestern frontier of the country are just immediately in shambles now. According to Chester Dunning, this then caused rebellion to sweep throughout southwestern Russia in favor of the pretender, and a lot of towns and villages and garrisons all go over to his cause. So this is already a nightmare for Tsar Boris, and he hasn't even sent his armies out yet. It's bad.
He's in trouble here.
Yeah. Now, Boris hadn't been completely idle, to be fair to him. In fact, in the background, whilst Dmitry's doing all this, he's managed to mobilize somewhere between 70 and 90,000 men. Which sounds like plenty to take care of this problem. Like, this should be done. Even if you just, like, throw men at the problem, it should be over. We'll see. So, this number sounded impressive on paper. The problem was that the regime was incredibly cash-strapped. With the famine, high taxation, suddenly, like, I think something like the tax revenues in places like Novgorod, which is a major urban center at the time, dropped by 80% after the famine. So
yeah, that's not enough to do anything.
Yeah, you're immediately in massive crisis trying to pay things. The result is that, like, the people who are showing up to fight for him are not, like, heavy mounted nobility and their retainers. These are, like, maybe some militia troops, along with a lot of badly paid military slaves and servitors, a few combat recruits, peasants, and wider slaves.
Mm.
So this is bad. This is, like, not a good force, and they immediately start to suffer from low morale. So he then splits this army into two forces, both of them led by a major boyar within the nobility, neither of them selected for their military experience. Again,
well, no, it's not Russia.
No, but, like, this is common in a lot of aristocracies at the time. It's like, we can give it to, like, this big, like, high-ranking guy. But, like, a lot of people might have been smart enough to, like, we'll give the like, title of the command to this big high-ranking guy, but we'll also put in some underlings who are competent. This does not come to pass. So, one of these two armies that he'd produced then manages to meet Dmitry's forces outside of Novgorod Siversky on December 21st. At this point, despite all these people going over to him, Dmitry probably still has less than 10,000 men. So he was outnumbered at least 3 times over, maybe 4 times over. Luckily for him, though, the Russian army's, like, plan is awful. It's basically a, yeah, get him, in terms of how plans go. And this goes very, very badly for the Russian army. Like, Dmitry's forces flank them, and in the process, their main commander is almost captured, and they are forced to retreat. Sounds good again for Dmitry on paper. It's not actually that great. So the army may have retreated. It does not break up. So it's still intact. It's still blocking his way to Moscow. He then runs out of supplies, has to break the siege of the city, and then head south towards friendlier parts. Here, many of his Polish mercenaries, like the remaining ones, would abandon him. Angry, and this is because of what actually is really a smart move for him long term. It sounds like a bad move. It's not. This is actually really smart and pays off well for him. The reason they abandon him is he refuses to allow them to pillage the local civilians for supplies.
Of course.
This might have, like, done badly for him in the short term and made some of them go home, including some of his major financial backers. This buys him massive popular support, especially considering that the Tsar's army, like, to keep themselves in the field, are forced to pillage the land and commit atrocities to get the necessary supplies. So already he is the good Tsar compared to Tsar Boris in terms of popular imagination. His army continues to grow by the thousands, augmented by streams of people from basically all social classes, so local military recruits, peasants, petty lords, defectors from Boris's army, loads and loads of Cossacks. And this isn't necessarily because, like, he's supporting, like, a wider social revolution, as some Soviet historians would paint him. This is really a case of, like, as you had with Perkin Warbeck and other figures, this is a lot of people projecting things onto this guy and going, I'm just going, because he's against the guy I don't like, I'm just going to assume for the moment that he's on board with all the stuff I actually want.
It's all these sort of 1,000 smaller problems, and False Dmitri is kind of like the sort of the glue kind of holding it together, right?
Yeah. Everyone just projects what they want onto this guy. And it's like, it's kind of that sentiment of, like, can't do worse than the current guy, I think, for a lot of people. So this is kind of like a mixed situation for him. It then goes bad again. In late June, his forces meet the Tsar's again. The Tsar had, in this time, managed to enlarge his army significantly, and the two sides clash outside the village of Dobrinich. Unfortunately for Dmitry, his forces are then routed. The Russian army does a very smart thing, and they mass together a huge force of 10,000 harquebusiers, whatever it's called, early riflemen, effectively. and like they position behind them behind this crude wall. And they also show up with 300 massed cannon. And artillery is not a great thing for Dmitry at this point. He doesn't really have a great like equivalent. So Dmitry himself barely escapes the retreat, and it's a complete calamity. And again, looks like his cause is coming undone. However, popular support for him continues to grow, with people from all ranks of society continuing to flank to him as a unifying figure against like the policies of Tsar Boris. So at this point, Dmitry's still in the game. He's nowhere near like actually taking power in the country. Like the actual major nobility, towns, and army within the country are all still on the side of Tsar Boris. Then something incredibly lucky happens. On April the 13th, Tsar Boris drops dead of a stroke.
Oh no. Well, I'll know for Boris, but...
Yeah. Now, Tsar Boris had been quite ill for a long time, I will say. Like Chester Dunning writes this in his work. That may have been one of the reasons why his initial preparations and response was ineffective to Dmitry. Also, whilst he was mobilizing his troops, he made like a big show of like a propaganda. No, everything's fine, actually, guys. So it may have been part of that strategy. I don't know. No other historian really links those two together. The nobility immediately rallies around his 16-year-old son, Fyodor II, as his successor. But the situation at this point has been transformed for Dmitry.
Yeah.
Popular support had been growing within the Russian army for False Dmitri's claims. And when Fyodor and his court attempt to replace the Russian army's commanders because they see them as like incompetent or corrupt, this backfires incredibly because the Russian army responds by immediately defecting to Dmitry's side.
Yeah, I'd say there's no coming back from that, but I'm sure there is.
Well, we'll see. So soon after this, Dmitry receives word he'd retreated to Putivly, which was that major fortress which saved his efforts before. He receives word of what's happened. He musters 2,000 men, and he starts to march on Moscow. Attempts to stop him militarily failed from what few forces that Fyodor's side manages to actually pull together. And when he reached Tula, not far from Moscow, he dispatched 2 envoys and a Cossack army to Moscow. These envoys carried a proclamation calling for the nobility to recognize him as the true Tsar and arrest the Godunovs, in return for which he offered a full pardon for any who fought against him. This is about the smartest thing he could have done, because immediately the nobility is like, oh, okay, well, yeah, great. We're all aboard. And unsurprisingly, they immediately cave. Dmitry's proclamation is read out within the city, which triggers a massive popular revolt in Moscow, which is partially backed by the Boyars. So on June the 1st, a crowd of over 1,000 people break into the Kremlin complex. They arrest Fyodor and his mother, the Dowager Tsaritsa, Maria, along with many other leading members of the Godunov clan. The next morning, after the violence had calmed down, the Boyars belatedly recognized False Dmitry as Tsar of all Russia.
Wow, I wasn't expecting him to be actually recognized, so he did it.
Yeah.
He succeeded.
Our boy Dmitry is going to be the only pretender here who did it.
Wow.
He is probably a complete fake, and he did it.
I'm impressed.
Wow, cool. Fake it until you make it. Well done.
Yeah.
So in that case, I guess he's false in the sense that he's a pretender, but he's vaguely somewhat true, Dmitry. If he made it.
He did it. It's not even a case of history recognizes him as this disputed pretender held country. No, he is recognized as a legitimate Tsar to this day.
Wow.
So,
well played.
Yeah. So Dmitry had actually left sent ahead instructions don't kill Fyodor. Don't just arrest him. Don't kill him. This doesn't happen. Despite his instructions, both Fyodor and his mother are strangled shortly afterwards. Yeah, this is one of the there's a few of these moments where it's you didn't have to do that probably, but it happened unfortunately. The thing though is kind of it really goes back to that discussion we were having before, where it's people do actually kind of recognize that Fyodor II was not the problem. Apparently he was like a well-qualified, like well-educated young man who was like a relatively charismatic young man. So it may be one of those of like, you still can't afford to keep this guy alive, fundamentally.
No.
So they're both strangled shortly after. It's announced officially that they like committed suicide because they just want to keep up appearances. On June 20th, Dmitry makes his triumphant entry into Moscow. And then on July 18th, he's given a further boost when the Dowager Tsaritsa, Maria Nagaya, who's the mother of the real Dmitry of Uglich, arrives in the capital and immediately recognizes False Dmitri as her deceased son and gives him that final stamp of authority.
Wow.
Then on the 21st of July, 1605, False Dmitri is crowned as Tsar. So he's done it. Our boy Dmitry's done it.
He's won.
He's won. This is top tier pretender. This is like incredible.
Good enough to fool his own fake mother.
Yeah.
Well, that's the question, isn't it?
Good enough that his fake mother will be like, yeah, I'll accept you.
Yeah, because it's what's better, being like the despised mother of a dead Tsar, or being the beloved mother of the actual Tsar?
Mm-hmm. I know which one I'd pick.
Yeah. So, as a result, like, Dmitry is, I think, one of the few pretenders I know of who has ever actually managed to succeed, and he's the only Tsar in the history of Russia to actually take the throne by what is effectively a popular revolt.
Yeah.
Alas, though, Dmitry did not reign long.
No.
So, according to Maureen Perry in the Cambridge History of Russia, the exact events of his short reign are difficult for us to piece together, mostly because many of the documents from his reign were destroyed by his successors afterwards. The result is that different historians have come up with varying different interpretations of his rule. The conventional view has been that he was an ineffective and debauched ruler who quickly lost the support of his backers and was eventually murdered and replaced by a more patriotic and traditional successor. Chester S. Dunning argues that this traditional version is highly distorted, that Dmitry was popular during his brief reign, and that the end of his rule was due to a conspiracy by a small group of nobles rather than popular discontent. Others have presented him as an enlightened ruler who adopted many Western innovations during his brief reign, whilst a major Russian study in the early 90s argued that he was a mostly conventional ruler who presided over a group of boyars that were not dissimilar from that Godunov had to contend with. So, whilst a lot of False Dmitri's policy seems to have been conventional, he did employ a number of innovations in how he ran his government. Some of them were acceptable to the Russian public, some of them were not. For example, he introduced the wearing of Western dress, which was something that would not be done again until Peter the Great. And he was often depicted in his official portraits as being beardless, which is a big break from his predecessors. According to Chester Dunning, he also neglected the appointment of the aristocracy, like the Russian aristocracy, and instead gave important positions to more educated men, and also often to some of his Polish backers. And he just generally seems to have had very little interest in observing court protocol and the large number of religious ceremonies that the Tsar was expected to preside over. He also apparently mixed with people of many different religions, not just Orthodox Christians, and thus he was frequently accused of being the agent of a Catholic plot to overthrow the established religion in Russia. Whilst he may have secretly become a Catholic whilst in Poland, there, as far as I can tell from all the different historians and accounts, there is no evidence that he really made any effort to convert Russia to Orthodoxy. And after he replaced the Orthodox Patriarch of Moscow with his own preferred candidate, he apparently had pretty good relations with the church for most of his reign. So one thing that does seem to have driven religious-based opposition to him, though, was his decision to follow through with his promised marriage to Maria Nishek. Despite demands from the church, she refuses to convert to Orthodoxy, and Dmitry backs her. So after some token resistance, the church backs down on this, though, and signs off on the marriage. So even that doesn't seem to have been that big a deal at this point. He also spent large sums of money modernizing the army that had brought him to power, which is a good idea. He increased the wages of his soldiers and lavished grants of land upon them. In international relations, he attempted to boost his prestige by styling himself as an emperor rather than the equivalent to a king. This was something that Peter the Great also would do over 100 years later. The difference is that Peter the Great managed to get widespread support from Western monarchs for this title. Tsar Dmitry doesn't seem to have managed to do this. Initially, it seems like he might have been about to aid Sigismund of Poland in his war against Sweden, but nothing ever came of it, although Sweden is going to be a major player going forwards. Towards the end of his reign, he appears to have been preparing an invasion of Crimea, because it turns out that that's something that Russian leaders like to do.
You're not a Russian leader if you haven't tried.
Yeah, exactly. And this was probably a prelude to a wider invasion against the Ottomans further south, which he had promised to Sigismund of Poland. So the events that led to the end of Dmitry's short reign originated in the first weeks after he took the throne, and revolved around a faction of nobles headed by the guy who had signed off on Tsarevich Dmitry's official report of his demise, Vasily Shuishky. So Shuishky had himself been a potential candidate for the throne after Fyodor II had been deposed, if it weren't for Dmitry. He was a descendant of the previous Rurikid dynasty, although I think he was like a junior branch. And he had been a major candidate when Fyodor I had died, only to be outmaneuvered by Tsar Boris. In the meantime, though, he had remained a major leading figure amongst the boyars, and Dmitry's accession really did a number on his own prospects of taking the throne. In the early days of Dmitry's reign, Shuishky and his two younger brothers seemed to have begun to plot against him, and they were probably one of the major sources of the rumour that he was the defrocked monk Grishka Otropev. Dmitry wasn't taking this lying down, though. He promptly arrested them, and at the resulting trial, he was himself the chief prosecutor. Dmitry has a real habit of leading from the front. Like, Dmitry is like, the difference I see between Dmitry and the two other people that we've talked about is Dmitry has like shocking moments of competency.
He gets his hands dirty.
He does.
Yeah, he really takes the initiative there.
Yeah. The problem is he also has a spectacular moment of incompetency that's about to hit. So apparently he argued so effectively against the Shuishky and his brothers at this trial that the assembled boyars unanimously declared that Shuishky should be put to death. This would have been the smart move, looking back at it. Unfortunately, at the point that Shuishky was being taken to Red Square to be executed, Dmitry steps in, and in what would prove the greatest mistake of his rulership, he pardons Shuishky and sentences him to exile.
No, that doesn't work. He'll come back.
Again, you don't always have to kill these people when you outmaneuver them. This is as blunders in Russian history go, I'm going to put this up there with the Tsars repeatedly choosing to send people like Lenin, Trotsky, and Stalin into exile rather than executing them. They literally executed Lenin's brother instead of him. And you picked the wrong one, I'm sorry. Yeah. So, Dmitry, however, thought that his rule on power was so secure that soon after, he revokes this exile. The blunder upon blunder. And at the end of 1605, he allows Shuishky and several members of the Godunov clan to return to Moscow. So, going really badly here.
Silly man. He had it in the bag.
Yeah, this is you had it. What are you doing?
Snatching defeat from the jaws of victory.
Yeah, exactly. Upon arriving back in Moscow, Shuishky seems to have immediately started conspiring again. Of course. He's now I've got to survive. Probably this guy could have had me killed once already. I'm just going to get rid of him. Exactly how big the resulting conspiracy seems to have been varies between the sources I consulted, but Chester Dunning argues it consisted mostly of other disgruntled nobles, churchmen, and rich merchants who had seen limited opportunities for advancement under Dmitry's rule. Some of these were probably unhappy as well about his planned marriage. Others were probably a bit unnerved as well by his plans to establish more trade links with Western nations, especially places like Poland, which traditionally had been seen as an enemy of Russia. After failing to kill Dmitry during the 1605 to 1606 army winter maneuvers, which he again personally led, they decided they were going to try and assassinate him during his wedding celebrations, which didn't happen. And then after that, they resorted to, okay, we have to kill him before he departs for Crimea and he is out of our hands. So on May 2nd, 1606, Marina Nishek arrives in Moscow for the wedding, accompanied by thousands of Polish wedding guests. These included fully armed veterans of Dmitry's campaign, who he did not disarm, many of whom behaved arrogantly, and this behaviour may have unnerved the populace and set the seeds for conspirators to act. The wedding itself went off without a hitch, surprisingly. Ironically, Vasily Shushki would actually play a major role in the ceremonies. I think he was also married off to a prominent princess as well. So ironically, Dmitry probably thought, this guy has been rehabilitated. He's my pet now, I can do what I want with him.
Yeah.
During this time, Dmitry was repeatedly warned that there were major conspiracies afoot to kill him. He does not seem to have taken these warnings seriously. Yeah. Basically, every scholar that I consulted are he was bizarrely naive in this capacity, or he was just extremely overconfident, one or the other. According to Chester Dunning, he did place his guard on 24-hour duty, but he was apparently convinced by his boyars to ignore the rumours of a wider plot and eventually sent half of them home to rest. On the night of May 15th, 6 assassins attempted to sneak into the Kremlin, only for them to be killed or apprehended. Still, Dmitry took no action. This is just, blunder after blunder.
I would be at least a little bit worried.
Yeah. Then on May... Oh, go ahead, Byron.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just going to say, is it that you're just so blind by the fact that you've managed to, you essentially scam your way this far?
Yeah.
Nothing can...
I can see him losing touch with reality a bit here. Look how far he has gone. Every point that something is going bad, it's turned around miraculously in his favour. So I can see him, just losing touch with reality at this point.
Yeah, he must feel untouchable.
Yeah. On May 17th, Shushki and his faction launched their plan. And to be fair to them, it's genius. Just before dawn, they led armed horsemen on a successful assault on one of the main gates to the Kremlin. And once they were inside, they began shouting that the Polish guests were about to assassinate the Tsar. At the same time, their fellow conspirators rang the city's alarm bells and sent out heralds repeating the message that the Poles were about to kill the Tsar. This immediately flooded the streets with thousands of angry Russians, which blocked Dmitry's dispersed guard and his foreign troops from quickly returning to the Kremlin to aim him. The assassins then broke into the palace, quickly overwhelmed the few guards on duty, and entered the Tsar's chambers. He may have had as few as 30 guards by the time that they arrived at the Kremlin. It's just the outcome writes itself at this point. So Tsar Dmitry tried to flee by jumping out the window of his apartments, trying to get into an adjoining building. Unfortunately, he slips, he falls, he breaks his leg.
Oh dear.
However, there is a moment of miraculous hope. It almost turns around again for him. Because at this point, a small number of loyal Polish soldiers arrive and they start to defend him from the conspirators. If they had held out slightly longer and the popular crowds had been able to get to him, he probably would have escaped. Unfortunately, the conspirators' forces overwhelmed those guards, as brave as they were, and they apprehend him. He's it's going badly. At this point, a merchant named Milnikov, that's literally the only information I can find about him on the historical record, denounces him to the assembled forces as a heretic and shoots him.
Oh.
So that's it. False Dmitri is double false at this point.
Yeah.
His body was then stripped naked and dragged to Red Square, where his body would be mutilated over the next 3 days. He probably has the worst outcome of most of the people that we talked about here. The conspirators quickly denounce him as a fraud and a heretic, and to complete the insult to his memory, his body was then burned, and the ashes were shot out of a cannon towards Poland. Which is really going really going above and beyond on your pettiness there.
Yeah, I mean that's quite a Russian end to a story.
A real William Wallace style execution. So Dmitri's allies were then quickly purged, and with the boyars unwilling to risk another deadly struggle with Prince Shushki, they elected him as Tsar Vasily IV. So this should be the end of the story. In a sensible world, this should be the end of the story. However, this is where things get profoundly stupid.
Oh, God.
This part.
Do they reconstitute him from the ashes?
Nearly. Because despite this, False Dmitri's legend did not die. Almost immediately after his death, his supporters began to spread rumours that he had in fact escaped his assassins and that he remained alive at large and that he was the true Tsar. Because it turns out that if an original work of fiction was pretty well received, at least for a while, then a lot of people are going to start clamouring for a sequel. This brings me to the story of False Dmitri II.
False Dmitri.
False Dmitri.
Yeah. Yeah. So before we get to False Dmitri II, I have to cover a bit of the aftermath of Dmitry I's assassination. Immediately after his death, one of his leading generals, Michael Molchanov, fled to Poland, where he began to promote the idea that Dmitry had escaped and was still at large. And he would even briefly attempt to play at being Dmitry until late 1606, when he basically realized no one was taking him seriously. Around the same time, a former Cossack named Ivan Bolotnikov began a major rebellion that was soon joined by other anti-Shushki nobility. This is a really complicated rebellion, and this whole section afterwards I've had to summarize down incredibly, so this is by no means a complete overview of this whole period. But despite some initial successes, this rebellion was quickly undermined by the fact that no Dmitry turned up in order to support it. Like, it was based on the idea that Dmitry is still at large and he will return. He does not return, obviously.
That's a damn problem things.
Yeah. This leads some of its nobles to defect back to Tsar Shushki. The revolt continued, however, and it was bolstered by the appearance of another pretender. This is Tsarevich Peter, or False Peter.
We're going to get a whole false family at this rate.
Oh, it's going to keep going. This revolt, False Peter was likely a young Cossack who was chosen just from a random band of Cossacks, and he claimed to be the son of Ivan the Terrible's infirm successor, Fyodor I. So, going one better in terms of immediate connections to the throne. Now, the slight problem with this is that makes him more legitimate than Tsar Dmitry, but no one seems to have cottoned on to this. According to Maureen Perry in the Cambridge History of Russia, the goal of the rebellion that propped him up appears not to have been to overthrow Tsar Vasily, but mostly just to gain concessions from him for the other Cossacks, because Tsar Boris had infringed on some of their traditional liberties. From there, things got even more confusing, though, as a bunch of other fake claimants to the throne independently appeared in the region of Astrakhan on the Lower Volga in southern Russia. These included Ivan Augustus, who claimed to be yet another son of Ivan the Terrible, a man named Ozinovich, that's it, who claimed to be the son of Tsar Ivan Ivanovich, who was the heir that Ivan the Terrible likely murdered, and someone called Laventry, who claimed to be yet another son of Ivan the Terrible's successor, Fyodor.
He got about a bit, did Theodore?
Yeah. For a childless man, a lot of heirs.
Yeah.
I want to say we are at moderate stupid levels at the moment.
Because you said not only was he childless, he was infertile, like he couldn't have kids.
He was infirm. I was not quite clear on that. There's no this isn't a child's second of Spain situation. There's nothing that I saw in my stuff saying that he could not actually do this. He just probably was too unhealthy or just bad luck.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. It makes sense.
So, to cut a long story short, all these various revolts failed. Whilst Bolotnikov and False Peter's revolt was the most substantial and caused widespread destruction, in October of 1607, their forces were eventually effectively surrounded and forced to surrender to the Tsar's army at the town of Tula. Both Bolotnikov and False Peter were executed, and the rebellion seemed to be extinguished. Unfortunately for Tsar Vasily, False Dmitri II had already made his debut. Exactly who the second pretender was is even more uncertain than who the original guy was. The most commonly believed theory by historians is that he was a destitute priest servant and teacher from part of Belarus, specifically the part of Belarus that was then ruled by the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, who either initiated the intrigue himself or was intimidated by a number of minor Polish nobles, veterans, to take up, veterans from False Dmitri's campaigns, to take up the role. This is kind of a common thread, as we'll see through. A lot of the time, people tend to raise up priests or beggars to take this position.
Yeah.
Because they're just dispensable, at the end of the day.
Right.
Whoever he was, he first crossed the border into Russia in May 1607, accompanied by a small army of mercenaries. He soon made his way to Starodub in the Seversk region, where he won the support of a number of settlements in the region and bolstered his forces. He and his army then marched to Tula to try and relieve the Bolotnikov and False Peter revolt, but by the time they were on the way, it had already failed. Over the next year, he continued to gather support, adding some of the remnants of Bolotnikov's forces, many Cossacks, and more mercenaries from Poland and Lithuania to his army. Along the way, he also made a call for the slaves of Shushki's supporters to join him, promising them their master's lands in response. According to Maureen Perry, this has been widely discussed in the context of Soviet-era claims of this being a class war. She argues, alongside a lot of more modern historians, that what he was actually referring to here, though, were not, peasants, but, the military bondsmen that belonged to the nobility. And she also notes that later on he would tone down these types of socially divisive offers after he was backed by a lot more noble figures. In April of 1608, his forces met the Tsars outside of Bolkov, one of the main fortified centers defending Moscow, where they inflict a severe defeat on Vasily's forces. Dmitry II then advanced to Tushino, just north of Moscow, which became his major base for a while, and in June, his army again defeats the Tsar's army, at Kodnica, on the outskirts of Moscow. They then laid siege to the capital, but they weren't fully able to cut off its supplies, which results in something of a stalemate. It was at this point that Tsar Vasily tried to pull off a phenomenally stupid moment of espionage. Just incredibly dumb. How did you not see this coming? As False Dmitri II's invasion hadn't been approved by the Polish king, Tsar Vasily tries to make a deal with Sigismund that all Polish troops will be withdrawn from the pretender's camp at Tushino, in return for which he would release the widow of False Dmitri I, Maria Nishek, and the other Poles that were imprisoned in the aftermath of False Dmitri I's assassination. After the agreement was made, though, the Polish troops decide, nah, not doing that. However, Vasily still releases Marina. Do you want to guess what Marina immediately did?
I could take a guess.
She goes straight to False Dmitri II and declares him her husband and remarries him for good measure.
I thought that might come along.
So after these successes and her turning up to back him, most of the country's nobility and boyars begin to switch sides, including members of the influential Romanov family. Much of the rest of the country then immediately follows suit. Likely due to threats from raiding parties that False Dmitri was sending out, this probably wasn't a popular uprising, but
yeah,
it's happening again.
Yeah. God,
it is happening again.
It's crazy that two different liars have been able to do the same thing twice.
Except not quite.
No.
Every indication at this point is that there is about to be a real False Dmitri II. He is about to become Tsar of Russia. Unfortunately, Tsar Dmitry still holds the major cities of Moscow, Novgorod, and Smolensk in the west. And whilst the food supply of Moscow was being briefly interrupted, it's not enough to force an end to the siege. At this point, however, in a big reversal of his blunder from before, Tsar Vasily has a big diplomatic breakthrough, which is that he sends his nephew, Prince Michael Skopin-Shushki, to Sweden. Or he might have just gone to Novgorod, I'm not sure how far he went, and he convinces the Swedes to send an army to intervene.
Ah.
So Sweden invades. So we are now at moderate stupidity levels.
Yeah, so just to keep track, so Swedes are in Russia. Poles are still in Russia to some degree?
Some of them, yeah.
Some of the Poles are still in Russia. And some forces that have come from the Grand Duchy of Lithuania as well. And everyone's fighting everyone.
Yeah, and Poland's also kind of at war with Sweden as well.
Oh, just when it was making sense.
It's going to get more complicated. So this army immediately arrives. Like this army immediately turns the tide of the whole thing. It defeats a force that False Dmitri II had sent to conquer Novgorod, and it breaks the siege of Moscow. Shopkin Shushki then enters the capital in triumph, where he immediately dies.
What did he die of? Was it natural? Or was he?
We don't know. The major theory that I found is that either the Tsar or the Tsar's brother had him assassinated because he's now becoming popular and is seen as a rival candidate for the throne.
Yeah.
So how's that for gratitude?
Yeah, I was going to say, so brutal.
Yeah. So this in turn is where things get real messy.
Oh, now it's where it
now is where it happens.
Been tidy so far.
Yeah. In summer of 1609, King Sigismund III Vasa of Poland, who is angered by the Swedish intervention, decided enough is enough and it's time for a change. Instead of continuing to support, however vicariously, pretenders to the throne, he himself plans to invade Russia and either make himself or his son Vladislav into the Tsar. So at this point, his army invades. We are like third to highest stupidity now. So basically what happens is he invades, he lays siege to Smolensk, and then he sends envoys to try and convince the Polish troops supporting False Dmitri II to actually just come back over full-heartedly to his side. Fearing treachery, because these envoys exclude him from the talks, Dmitry II flees promptly from Toshino to Kaluga, which throws all his forces into disarray. The Polish army then advances further into Russia. They defeat Vasily's combined Russian and Swedish forces at the Battle of Klishino. False Dmitri II manages to recover some of his forces and marches on Moscow again. As soon as they arrive, his men appear to abandon him by proposing to the Moscow nobility that they should both depose their own... that basically the nobility should depose Vasily and that the backers of False Dmitri should depose him and they should elect a new Tsar.
Clean slate.
Yeah. This half works. What happens is that basically the Muscovites overthrow Tsar Vasily, they torture him and send him to be in a monastery.
Yeah.
Luckily for False Dmitri II, this turns out it was a bluff by his troops and they don't overthrow him. So again, he's been miraculously saved at the last minute.
Yeah, this is almost divine intervention at this point. This is miraculous.
Less luckily for him, the Polish army then marches on Moscow. In the aftermath of Vasily's deposition, nobility fails to elect a new Tsar, and instead a council of 7 boyars effectively become the provisional government. The arrival of the Polish army then again leads most of False Dmitri II's forces to desert him, and he flees back to Kaluga again. So at this point, it looks like False Dmitri II is basically finished. The Polish king is on the verge of being the winner of this conflict. At one point, it looks like there's an agreement that's been signed between King Sigismund and the 7 boyars for his son Vladislav to become Tsar, and he disputedly becomes Tsar at this point. A lot of nobility do swear over to him and things like that. The Polish army also occupies the capital, and Vasily, the former Tsar Vasily, is shipped back to Poland in chains. However, this all falls apart when Sigismund refuses to send his son to Moscow to be crowned, and it becomes clear that he either intends to rule as a regent or to become Tsar himself. This is a phenomenally stupid move. Everyone just makes stupid moves constantly, is this whole conflict.
Yeah.
So, the boyars reject this proposal. And what this actually ends up doing, because the church comes out against him as well, because Vladislav would not become an Orthodox, would not convert to Orthodox Christianity. And Sigismund basically looks like he's about to try and impose Catholicism on the country. The church comes out against him, and this turns into a war of national liberation suddenly. Everyone puts aside their arguing, and they unite against the Polish invaders.
Yeah.
This miraculously revives False Dmitri II's hopes.
I knew this was coming. As soon as he said that they rallied around, they need a big leader, and they'll take any Dmitry at this point.
It's not clear cut that they're all going to recognize him, but he's now suddenly one of the major candidates again.
Yeah.
Throughout the autumn of this is 1610 we're in by this point. Throughout the autumn of 1610, he began to recruit new followers to augment his Cossacks, along with a number of mercenaries. Unfortunately for Dmitry II, though, right at the moment where his fortunes were improving, his own decisions and style of ruling would come back to bite him. Growing more and more paranoid, he began to order arbitrary arrests, confiscations, and even executions of his close supporters. This guy was clearly spooked by everything that had gone on by this point. According to Chester Dunning, this climaxed when a set of forged Polish documents emerged, which showed an apparent conspiracy amongst the Tsar's own Tatar bodyguard. False Dmitri II responded by having 50 of his bodyguard detained, beaten, tortured, and then released.
Oh yeah, because they're going to forget that.
Yeah, this is again, stupid all the way down.
They've learned their lesson, guys. Yeah. It's fine. One
of these was the... Sorry, go ahead, Byron.
No, I was just going to say, none of the times where this release tactic has worked, has it ever worked?
No.
But just this next time, it might do.
Yeah. It's never worked for any of us, except let's march on Russia. It always goes well. So one of these was the captain of his bodyguard, who was a very high-ranking Tatar prince, Peter Urusov, who was understandably a bit annoyed by this. And on December 11th, 1610, he murders False Dmitri II whilst he's out sledding.
That ruins your Christmas.
Say that again?
That ruins your Christmas, being murdered out sledding.
Yeah, sledding. Sledding's a fun activity, guys. Leave the disputes at home. Don't taint sledding with your stupid beef, okay? I know I tortured you. So according to Maureen Perry, he may also have been motivated by Dmitry having executed one of his close allies. Shortly after his death, Marine Nishek, though, gives birth to his son, Zarovek Ivan Dmitry. This is a complicated one. Dmitrievich. Ivan Dmitrievich. Leaving yet another potential pretender to the throne who would be active in years to come. Also known in history as False Dmitri the Fourth.
How have we skipped from 1, 2 to 4?
Oh, God.
Oh, no.
I'm getting to that. So, you might think that the death of False Dmitri II would draw the strange episode of the False Dmitris to an end. And we're almost there. At least, you'd think this is where it's going to go. But if you're a Hollywood executive who just had a sequel to a popular Dmitry underperform at the Russian Tsar office, what might you do as a last desperate roll of the dice?
I'll go for another. All or nothing.
That's right. Let's turn this duology into a full-blown franchise.
God.
Because at the beginning of 1611, False Dmitri III appeared in Novgorod. Luckily for everybody, this is not we're almost done. The story of False Dmitri III is pathetic by comparison to his predecessors. He's I'd say he's the Jaws 3D of this franchise.
I see.
Possibly even the straight-to-DVD sequel. Again, the exact identity of this pretender is uncertain, though according to R.G. Skrinikov, an early chronicle under the succeeding Romanov dynasty describes him as a deacon from Moscow named either Sidorka or Matyushka. Just a second, I think someone's just knocked on my door.
Oh. It's False Dmitri V.
Going to overthrow Charles.
Sorry about that. No, there was no one. It was someone next door. So, he was probably actually a petty trader when he first arrived in Novgorod, and then he became a beggar when he failed at that. His attempt to reveal himself as False Dmitri in the city failed, and he was forced to move on. By the time of his arrival, the name of Tsar Dmitry had lost a lot of the luster it had before, and only a few towns actually supported his claims. He eventually based himself out of Pskov, where he began to be known for his tyrannical rule. In March of 1612, the Cossacks camped around Moscow, briefly swore allegiance to his cause, only to immediately desert him.
Yeah.
In May, the citizens of Pskov also tired of his rule and had him overthrown, after which he was escorted to Moscow, where he was imprisoned. There, according to Chester Dunning, he was placed on display for the soldiers' entertainment, and then much later was hanged. So, goodbye, False Dmitri III. You were by far the worst of the False Dmitris, and probably the worst of the pretenders that we discussed today.
Yeah, just completely incapable. I go back to your description of there's no other word for it, pathetic.
It's just awful.
Yeah.
We do still have the thread to wrap up of False Dmitri IV. Thankfully, it's also very brief. So, in the aftermath of all of the Polish invasion, a national unity government of sorts was formed between the various warring Russian sides, and this eventually succeeded in kicking the Polish army out of Russia, though not before they again burned down large parts of Moscow. So it's all bad all the time.
Yeah.
Marina Nishek would continue to promote the candidacy of her son Ivan for Tsar over the next year, and periodically won over many supporters. Eventually, however, in late 1612, she and her son would be put aside when a Russian assembly elected the popular Michael Romanov as Tsar. Marina and her son would continue to resist until 1614, when their forces were finally defeated by government troops. The 3-year-old pretender Tsarevich was sadly hanged, and his mother died in captivity soon after. Yeah. Not just grim. Like, it's one of those where you could have had a Lambert Simnel moment and stuck him in the kitchens to work or something, but not to be.
There'll be another 20 False Dmitris if you don't.
Yeah, I mean, I think Michael Romanov was a little ahead of the time by realizing all the previous guys failed because they didn't get rid of this guy.
Yeah.
So with Tsarevich Ivan's death, the last major challenge to Tsar Michael's power was eliminated, and he was gradually able to consolidate his rule. This would end the time of troubles in Russia. He would go on to found the famous Romanov dynasty, who would rule Russia for the next 300 years, and I'm sure nothing bad ever happened to any of them again, or in the rest of Russia either.
Definitely not.
So that brings us to the end of the tale of False Dmitri.
It's fascinating how sort of perennial a lot of Russian sort of problems are in Russian history. There's so much of just, we've got too much land, we've got too little people, no one likes each other, and everyone's a serf.
And we've got too many Tsars, apparently.
Yeah, and everyone's... it would be funny if they continued False Dmitri.
Yeah, all the way down.
Yeah, because the thing is, at that point, he could be fired out of a cannon, but he could also be 200 years old.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. He's indestructible, apparently. But on that note then, ladies and gentlemen, I have to ask, who is our favourite pretender?
Oh,
definitely not False Dmitri III.
No.
He's definitely the worst. But I think False Dmitri I, I think you've managed to get both the best and worst ones in this episode,
yes.
Charles.
Yeah.
I was going to say, when you start discussing some of the incompetence of Perkin Warbeck, I was like, ooh, maybe I have a strong contender against me here. My gut feeling is that, the saga of the False Dmitris wins the day.
Yeah, you can't not. I'm sorry, but if there was 5 Perkin Warbecks, Perkin Warbeck wasn't even the best Perkin Warbeck. I'm sorry, but the False Dmitri thing, when you mentioned originally, before we recorded this, you said it goes in a slightly different direction, I wasn't expecting him to end up being Tsar. There's nothing that made me think he'd succeed. He's the pretender that pretended so hard that he stopped pretending.
He became the mask.
He faked it till he maked it.
Yeah.
He did.
On that note, then, I think I'm safe in saying that Tsar Dmitry, Tsar False Dmitri I, congratulations, you are the first entry into our official Cabinet of Curiosities. Very well earned.
Is there a picture of False Dmitri?
There are pictures. There are pictures of False Dmitri. I forgot to bring them along. There'll be plenty of pictures on the YouTube version of this for you to have a look at. He looks nothing like the people he's supposed to be descended from.
Oh, good. Yeah. Well, that's how you know he's a real pretender.
Exactly. So, at the end of this long and winding road, I think then that has been a great little start for our first episode. We've had a great different variety of pretenders. Things went completely nuts at the end. And so I'm going to start drawing things to a close. So, Cassie, where could people potentially find you, and what other projects are you working on?
So, if you follow the Histocrat channel at all, you probably know me from Mythological, which I've been hosting with Charles for quite some time now. And I've also been developing now my spin-off show, Folklore and Superstition, where I tell actually short stories of bits of folklore and mythology that don't really fit into the main series. The audio version goes in the same feed as Mythological. The video version has its own channel, which should be linked somewhere on your screen at some point.
And Byron, where else can people find you?
Well, I also have my own YouTube channel as well, just my full name, Byron Lewis. If you're interested in media criticism or, some history content as well, there as well. If that's your sort of thing, you can head over there. And I think I'm on Blue Sky, Blue Sky, bsky.app at byronlewis.com.
Yeah, and I, of course, you can find all the stuff I'm mostly doing on the Histocrat channel. I'm also on Mythological with Cassie, and you can find it on all good podcasting platforms. And then on top of that, also, I've been making a little bit of a side venture of myself, in addition to this one, which is over on the channel Histotrash. You can check out a long-form video essay I did on a video game that's near and dear to my heart, because it has to be near and dear to someone's heart, Pathologic 2. So maybe check that out if you want to hear more of me, if you've exhausted everything else I've done. And in terms of where this show is going to be on YouTube, you're probably watching this now on the Histocrat channel. We're going to put the first episode of this in audio form on the Mythological feed so that people get a taste of it and know where to find it going forwards, and we can point people to it. It's going to be on its own podcast feed, its own dedicated feed. It'll have its own swanky logo. It's going to have its own thing. So I hope you enjoy, and we're hopefully going to be back in a month, maybe a couple of months. We'll see. We're all busy people, but we're going to try and make this more of a regular thing, I think.
We've said that before.
Yes, famous last words.
Famous. See how that turns out.
This is in terms of famous last words, this is like False Dmitri the 20th, famous last words from how many times we've had famous last words on this matter. But
we could all be False Dmitri, Charles.
Yes, you're right, False Dmitri, of course.
Dmitri.
As the least convincing False Dmitri here, yes.
I would argue most, as far as the trend is going, I think that having a trans False Dmitri is inevitably where it's going to be.
Yeah.
Would that make you the true Dmitri?
Yeah, the true Dmitri. Hooray.
I am now Dmitry.
Yeah.
Yes. In many ways, we are all Dmitry. Thank you, folks, for watching/listening, and we'll talk to you again soon.